After spending 3 years in a coma, he wakes up to find that the game he mastered for over a decade has become reality. Now millions of people are desperately searching for the legendary God Jinwoo, said to hold the key to conquering the tower. The problem is, God Jinwoo already exists, and it's him. While the entire world chases his identity, he quietly grows stronger, builds his influence, and finally tries to give his family the life they deserve. Can he keep the truth hidden while the entire world hunts for him? The system showed that floor 100 had begun loading in the challenge tower. The protagonist was at the center of the game world, where he played as a knight, ranting about how stubborn they were. Resistance was futile, and they shouldn't even try, since he'd almost cleared floor 100. Jinwoo was the #1 player in Summoner's Battle, the main character, and the game he was playing was called Summoner's Battle, or SB for short. It's a dead game with 0 popularity and a high difficulty level, played only by old men. He received numerous comments from various users, and in this game, he set incredible records and became legendary. He'd long since cleared floor 99. But something happened. Yes, Jinwoo is a monster, one that even the top players bow before. He said he was a bit busy right now, and swiped the screen, then said that as soon as he cleared this, he'd quit gaming forever. Jinwoo was walking down the street, holding a tablet. Frankly, he's a complete loser in real life. He wasted 10 years of his life playing games and ultimately failed to enter university. Because of this, he couldn't find a normal job either. His parents may be silent, but they're clearly heartbroken. So he decided to quit this dead game and get his act together. After all, he's already 24 years old, and it's time to start living like a normal person. For his own sake and for the sake of a worthy end to Jinwoo's journey, no matter what, he'll get past this last floor and leave. He spoke, and the summoning window appeared. After which, a system appeared in front of him, and some commentators began discussing his personality. He exclaimed, "Summon White Whale. Ultimate skill." The system reported that he'd summoned the White Whale, and at that moment, everything around him began to sparkle with bright sparks. Users were asking, "It's been 10 years already, hasn't it?" The protagonist confidently repelled the attack, but suddenly, he gritted his teeth in anger. A bright flash of light erupted, stunning everyone. His enemy was cut into several pieces, and Jinwoo, looking ahead, confidently managed to do so. When he heard new notifications, he turned and saw a huge monster behind him. The creature opened its maw and attempted to destroy Jinwoo with a fiery blast, but he covered his face with his hand and summoned a blue dragon. When he did, the flame evaporated, and he began to fight the monster. Their forces clashed, and suddenly, Jinwoo looked at everything happening in surprise. The fiery blast exploded, and fragments flew in all directions. A moment later, the system reported that the 100th floor of the test tower had been passed. At that moment, he suddenly exclaimed that he had done it while standing in the middle of the street. He continued laughing and shouting that he had finally succeeded, and people passing by were confused. What's wrong with him? He looks crazy. Jinwoo was overjoyed that he'd finally cleared the 100th floor and could finally say goodbye to this game. He needed to show off to the elders before leaving. Suddenly, the guys around him looked straight ahead and wondered, "What's that?" Jinwoo also saw that the system had shown that the challenge tower, floor 100, had been cleared and that beta testing was complete. He couldn't understand why he was seeing a game screen in the sky. Suddenly, bright red flags began scattering across the street, and people passing by picked them up to see what they were. The system told them to tear up the summoning scroll, and Jinwoo wondered, is this some kind of promotion? His friends suggested tearing it up, and the guys did so immediately. Jinwoo exclaimed, "No, if he tears the scroll, everything will turn out badly." But he didn't have time to warn the guy, and the scroll tore. A moment later, a bright flash of light appeared in front of him, and the system announced that a new world was opening. Jinwoo was horrified by the sight before him when suddenly a multitude of monsters appeared. He simply couldn't believe it and turned around abruptly to see terrified people killed by the monsters. Some of them had been hit by a car. The people were terrified and screaming for an ambulance when Jinwoo was also hit by a car. He lay on the ground, thinking, "How awful, this stupid game." He stared at his phone screen, which said a new world was opening. Sometime later, when Jinwoo had already been admitted to the hospital, the TV was on, and a journalist reported that, following the next news, South Korea had unfortunately again finished last in the rankings in the International Player League. He lay unconscious under an IV drip, while his mother sat next to him with his father. The journalist continued by saying that in response to this, associations are declaring the need to acquire higher-level summons, but some experts believe the state budget is insufficient to purchase high-ranking scrolls. At that moment, his mother looked at the apple she'd peeled in shock when she saw Jinwoo begin to move, and asked them to call a doctor quickly. As Jinwoo had woken up, he did indeed open his eyes, and his parents sat down next to him to discuss what was happening. The news he heard as soon as he opened his eyes was truly shocking. Firstly, 3 years had passed since the accident, and secondly, the vision he'd had before the accident of the game becoming reality hadn't been a dream. A stone golem entered their room. It was his father's pet. It now helps his father with loading and unloading packages, and it's very reliable. Jinwoo wondered, is this rank E summon his father's? And thirdly, The world's top players stated that to ascend the trial tower, they needed to find a Korean player named Jin Woo. Rachel mentioned this in the news. They, the 5 heavenly operators, were still waiting for him. When he appeared, the world would be turned upside down. Everyone, truly, was looking for Jin Woo, the whole world, and he realized it was his nickname. Besides, it was a name. He couldn't mistake it for anything else. This was definitely Rachel, one of the 5 heavenly emperors. Had the world of Summoner's Battle really become reality? A system appeared in front of him, asking if he wanted to start training. He chuckled at this, and his mother said she knew it was sudden, but he didn't have to start training right away. He should rest first. He told his mother no. He needed to get used to everything as quickly as possible, and he was fine, so she shouldn't worry. He smiled and thought that he had nothing yet, and didn't fully understand this changed world, but he was extremely lucky. After all, in this game, he could definitely become the best in the world. He was discharged from the hospital and returned home, where everything had changed beyond recognition. He immersed himself in the new reality of a world where games were no longer just games. Duels, raids, treacherous dungeons, challenge towers. The entire digital infrastructure had successfully migrated into the real world. 3 years had passed, and humanity seemed to have found a way to exist with summoned pets. He rose from his computer desk and said, well, so be it. None of them would ever reach his level. Perhaps he should begin. When he clicked the Start Training button, the system initiated the process. After a while, Jin Woo emerged outside and announced that everything was as he'd expected. There wasn't a soul here. Of course, trudging into such a remote place would be a bit of a hassle, but he couldn't risk allowing an unstable pet to appear among humans. The system announced that the reward for completing the training was a low-level summoner scroll. He was strongly advised to use it in open areas. Now everything seemed real to him. Please, let him get something decent. Even for him, Jin Woo, a legend, starting with low-ranking trash was a death sentence. After all, his game was a complete dump, notorious for its paltry odds. The rank hierarchy went all the way up to F rank, and the odds were simply unrealistic, with a basic scroll only having a 1% chance of reaching even a rank. He held the scroll in his hands and muttered, please, just this once. He's begging for something, anything remotely useful. His hands trembled, and he looked at it hopefully, thinking that a D rank would be incredibly useful, but he was expecting at least a rank, even a useful E rank pet. He begged for it and tore the scroll apart, and the system reported that a low-level summon scroll had been activated. When he saw those words, he froze and asked himself, did he succeed? Wait, what do these summoned pets even look like in real life? When he tore it open, a bright beam of light appeared in front of him, and he exclaimed, what's going on? The system reported that player Jin Woo had successfully summoned a wind fairy. He realized it was EX rank, and asked if that rank even existed in the game. The fairy's eyes widened and she began screaming, wait, what's going on? Good heavens. Did they actually summon her? Like for real? It was incredible. After all, it had been an eternity. Jin Woo was surprised. Since when did summoned pets talk? He looked at her more closely and asked, is she a Ramba? The fairy replied that she wasn't, because she was a wind fairy. But suddenly she was surprised. Only one person had ever called her that. Could he really be their god, Jin Woo? Just don't let him tell her he really is that Jin Woo. She started screaming with joy, because he couldn't even imagine how much she'd missed him. Ramba leaned toward his face and began hugging him, and Jin Woo replied that he understood everything and thought with a disgruntled expression, which he was starting to remember. A rank E summon, Wind Fairy. If you unlocked her hidden mechanics and used the right rune, she would transform into a top-tier support with insanely high attack speed. They'd spent so much time together in the beginning that he'd eventually nicknamed her Ramba. But wasn't she removed from the game during that massive bug fixing the first year? What did the official statement say? Suspended due to the discovery of a critical bug. He remembers being furious when the pet he'd been leveling for a whole year was removed. But what was going on? The system reported that the summoned wind pet was level 1, rank isolated. This isolation occurred after discovering balance-breaking bugs under certain conditions. The active skill was wind pressure. With each swing of the staff, it increased the target creature's attack speed by 3%. He was surprised and asked again, is she isolated? Ramba replied that she had suddenly been dragged into some abyss, locked in a cage from which she could not escape. She offered to stay together forever this time, Jin Woo. He extended his hand and asked her to wait a moment, then asked who had isolated her. She looked at him in surprise, then suddenly froze and began screaming about a severe headache. Jin Woo hadn't expected such a reaction, and Ramba began to explain that she was in so much pain that she couldn't remember anything, and who had placed the seal blocking her memories. Jin Woo replied that everything was clear, then she should just tell him everything she remembered. She was stunned with shock, then changed her expression and said she couldn't tell him everything, and everyone was isolated, and as a result, they couldn't be summoned no matter how many times players tried. Jin Woo asked again, them? She meant there were other isolated pets besides her? Ramba replied, yes, they were kept in different places, so she didn't know where they were, but there were definitely others. She thought there were about 10 pets. Jin Woo was surprised and asked again, 10? If there were 10? No, that couldn't be. Those same 10 pets that were considered bugs and removed while he was using them. If each of them was reclassified as isolated, that would be incredible. In any case, Jinwoo seemed to have a chance every time he used a scroll. He hadn't felt a low-level call from a summoning scroll for so long, it was crazy. Jinwoo asked again, so they only react to scrolls he uses? Then he's the only person on Earth capable of defeating EX rank creatures. Is this some kind of hidden bonus for clearing floor 100 of the Tower of Trials? Does every basic scroll he uses now guarantee EX rank? He suddenly successfully summoned a hairy gorilla and realized that wasn't true. An F rank, so the chance of getting an EX rank is still purely luck. What a pathetic gacha. Then the plan is this. He needs to use the maximum number of prize scrolls to collect as many EX rank creatures as possible. If he can recover all the creatures, he'll become even more invincible than he was in his prime. He called her by name and told her that from now on, she should no longer call him God Jinwoo, but simply call him Jinwoo. She asked why. He replied that, thanks to the 5 heavenly emperors, that nickname was already known to the entire world. Despite his superior tactical knowledge and experience, he didn't realize how vulnerable he'd become in these 3 years of absence. If word got out that Jinwoo was commanding EX rank creatures, he'd simply become a target for all the envious and power-hungry. Suddenly, a roar echoed through the forest, and countless birds scattered. Jinwoo wondered what kind of earthquake it was. Ramba and the gorilla also began screaming in fear. And suddenly, the system announced the transition to the next phase. A basic training dungeon was generated, and Jinwoo wondered, is this really happening now? This was wonderful. Did he really need to go there? He'd certainly completed thousands of dungeons, but reality was completely different. No, he needed to pull himself together. He was genuinely scared now. After all, it wasn't him who would be fighting, and besides, this was just training. Okay, all or nothing, the system asked him to please proceed to the entrance. It was time for him to get used to this new, distorted reality. When he entered the labyrinth, he froze. Was he really in a dungeon now? It really was creepy here. The system informed him that he had entered a training dungeon, and he realized it was all about to begin. To fight in the dungeon, he must assemble a team of summoned pets, with a maximum of 5 pets per team. Did he want to assign a wind fairy and a hairy gorilla to his team? He thought about how, to increase the chances of successfully clearing a dungeon, people usually assemble a full team of 5 creatures. Clearing a dungeon with only 2 might seem reckless, but with a clear plan, it's entirely possible. He'd done this thousands, no even tens of thousands of times, and he already had the perfect plan in his head. He summoned them automatically, and Ramba and the gorilla were ready. Jinwoo wondered if there were more monsters in the training dungeon, but before he could fully consider this thought, he was suddenly startled when the system announced a hungry wolf and a gray wolf prowling nearby. The wolf was growling, and he needed to defeat it and escape the cave. Jinwoo immediately began to consider the situation. It was a gray wolf, rank F. The system reported that a shield had been created for the player. When he created the shield around himself, it glowed brightly, and he realized that the player's defense system had created it exactly as in the game. But now he was in reality. The system warned him that he would die if attacked while the shield was inactive. He understood that if he lost, the restart button wouldn't appear. At that moment, the wolf began to approach him, and Jinwoo shouted, "The gorilla will rush forward." The gorilla charged, but suddenly stopped between them, and Jinwoo realized it was too slow. However, he had expected this outcome, so he immediately summoned Ramba, who rushed to cast her spells and swung wind pressure. This is an iron swing that dramatically increases an ally's attack speed. When she directed her powers at the gorilla, magical beams of light emanated from the creature, and the gorilla immediately charged. Jinwoo thought this was excellent. Ramba is, as always, at her best. The wolf also began to rapidly approach his pet, and Jinwoo wondered, wait, was it really that big in the game? Up close, the wolf seemed even bigger. Tolgo wouldn't lose, would he? Judging by all the data he had, that was impossible. But what if their appearance in reality was somehow affected by something? At that moment, Tolgo lunged straight at the snarling wolf, and a moment later, the wolf bit through Tolgo, drawing blood. The gorilla fell to the ground, screaming in pain, and Jinwoo called out Ramba's name, but she screamed that she was already swinging with all her might, trying to protect the gorilla. A moment later, Tolgo attacked the biting wolf directly with his fist, sending the wolf flying. Ramba exclaimed that this was the end of this creature. She swung her staff sharply, and directed its power at Tolgo, who was raised above the ground. A moment later, he struck the wolf even harder, several times, causing the wolf to growl and groan in pain. A moment later, Jinwoo and Ramba watched in stunned silence as Tolgo easily destroyed his opponent. Tolgo then slammed his fists against his chest in joy, and Ramba exclaimed that they had won. Jinwoo breathed a sigh of relief, and the system announced that they had cleared the dungeons, rewarding him with a low-level Power 2 rune. He realized he had survived and was overjoyed. Sometime later, evening fell in the city, and the protagonist's sister took the money and said, "See you again." She held the envelope in her hands, happily thinking it was a jackpot, having earned 2001 today alone. 3 years ago, when the world changed, she received the profession of rune collector. She mainly goes into low-level dungeons and makes a living selling runes to promising players. She decided to become a player because after her brother's accident, their family found themselves in dire straits. One day, in a dungeon, she miraculously dropped a mid-rank summon scroll, which resulted in her receiving a C-rank creature, which has only a 1% drop rate. She was extremely lucky, and thanks to this C-rank shadow elf, she was able to establish a stable income from runes. Suddenly, she noticed her brother calling her on the phone, and she asked if he had been discharged yet. Jinwoo replied, yes, they discharged him, and let her listen to him. He heard from father that she was selling runes. Jina exclaimed in anger, then asked again, what, she's selling runes? Actually, she's collecting them, okay? Jinwoo had to pull the phone away from his ear because of her scream, after which he said, okay, she's a rune collector. By the way, does she know where the synthesis center is? Father said she knew. Jina asked again, the synthesis center? Of course she knew. It's in the player zone. When trial towers appeared all over the world, people needed a place to do everything related to summoned pets, and that's how the player zones came into being. They contain not only possible dungeons, but also synthesis centers, an enhancement center, and the like. Everything you need can be done right at the tower. When she arrived at the cafe and met her brother, she asked if he knew that the towers in Jamsil and Hinde had become challenge towers, right? Jinwoo didn't answer, and she continued saying that things were different in other countries. But in Korea, towers only appeared in those two places, so the player zone he needed was only there. He was surprised, really, when he thought it was logical that they were located near the tower. After all, they help with passing this. After that, Jin-ah wondered, by the way brother, what creatures did he get? Were they F rank and E rank? He answered, yes, and Jin-ah asked, really? E rank only has a 5% drop rate. He replied that he was probably just lucky, although he silently apologized to his sister for this lie. In any case, he would need her help. He wanted to get used to the system as soon as possible, and in return, he would give her some pocket money. Jin-ah asked again, he knows she makes way more money than him, right bro? Jinwoo replied that she never knew how life would turn out. Who knew? Maybe he'd become the greatest player in the world. Jin-ah chuckled at his words and remarked that everyone else fancied themselves the next Rachel or Genos. But those people were the chosen ones. They were geniuses, and they were nowhere near them. Jinwoo asked again, is that so? Fine, let her just show him the way. Jin-ah was surprised by his reaction, and Jinwoo said he wanted to see for himself what their player zone was like. After a while, they approached a tall tower. Jin-ah asked, Jinwoo, he said he summoned pets today. Who did he get? He replied, a wind fairy, and Jin-ah said she'd never heard of such a thing. Maybe he'd show her. Jinwoo replied, no way. Why did she even want to see it? Jin-ah said he was being greedy. They weren't strangers, and the pet wouldn't disappear even if he showed it. Jinwoo replied that she should show her pet first, and she asked again, her pet? Fine. Then she'd do it, and he shouldn't be too surprised when he saw it. She conjured a magic sphere in her hand, and Jinwoo wondered what kind of pet she had, since she was so confident. A moment later, she showed him a C-rank shadow elf, and Jinwoo was stunned by this. She asked again, what's with that sluggish reaction? Maybe he didn't know, but C ranks and above are considered nobles? Jinwoo replied that he understood everything and thought, noble? Ranks were the ones he only used to gain experience in the fusion center. They had never even been in the dungeon with him. Jinwoo asked if shadow elves could speak Korean. He waved his arms in front of the elf, and Jin-ah asked what he was doing. He didn't understand. Couldn't she even hear him? And Jinwoo asked again, what was he doing? He was just trying to say hello to her sister's proud pets and ask them to look after her. Jin-ah asked in surprise, since when do pets talk? Jinwoo was confused and realized that they couldn't talk, but suddenly remembered his pets. After all, Ramba had been talking since their first meeting. He asked, so pets usually don't talk? Jin-ah asked again, but where would he find a talking pet? He thought about it, but it was true. But since Ramba could talk, he thought all pets could now. It turned out that she was a special case, and Jin-ah asked him to show her his pet now, and Jinwoo told her to do it later. Jin-ah got angry and screamed, but why? She showed him her pet. Jinwoo replied that he'd already told her he'd show her later. She should just lead him where he needed to go. Jin-ah exclaimed that he was a liar, but he should wait for her and not run so fast. After a while, they arrived at the right place and found themselves in the center of a bright and beautiful street. Jinwoo looked around in surprise and said, is this really the same Jamsil arena he knew? Jin-ah replied, yes. After the corporation's testing tower appeared, they simply tore everything down. Jinwoo asked again, but why? She replied, who would want to have fun next to this gloomy tower? This place had long since ceased to be kind and cheerful. Jinwoo was surprised. Doesn't that just make everything more interesting and cool? Jin-ah replied, does he mean the place where you go to die? The dungeons are now right in the Jamsil arena. Who would come here for fun? He replied that perhaps that was logical and reflected that the dungeons were indeed scary, but he was seeing things he'd only seen in the game. In real life, they were incredibly captivating. Was this a local market? People were approaching the stalls, buying things and asking about prices. Jin-ah noted that yes, players could freely trade everything here, from summoning scrolls to runes. Jinwoo considered this, only recalling memories of how he'd opened scrolls and runes every day with that rich man. his friend. Jinna asked again. Did he see the brochure there? It explained all the basics, but if he needed a guide, he could go to the information desk. And since he was still a newbie, why not try the academy that ran the player headquarters? He had a lot to learn. Jinwoo replied, no, it was fine. He understood he had nothing to learn and nothing to ask about. He could handle his growth just fine on his own. Jin-ah looked at him in surprise and asked, is he sure he can handle this? Jinwoo answered, yes, she can go home first, and thanked her for the tour. Jin-ah asked angrily, what, is he staying here? Jinwoo waved and said he wanted to look around a bit. He'd been acting very strange for Jin-ah lately, as if he were possessed by something. But was he sure he'd be okay? She should just keep a light eye on him. She shouted after him, not to overdo it, and to call if he needed help. Jinwoo waved and called for Ramba, who immediately appeared in front of him and began to glow. She shouted his name, and Jinwoo asked her to be quiet, covering her mouth with his finger. Ramba started coughing and asked what he was doing and what was going on here. He pulled her close and whispered for her to listen to him. From this point on, she is forbidden to talk outside the dungeon. She looked surprised and asked, what? He continued saying that she couldn't let people know she could talk. She could only talk inside the dungeon from now on, okay? Let her nod if she understood. Ramba nodded and he said, great, and now they needed to get everything in order. As he remained squatting, he considered the need to secure at least some startup capital if he wants to start clearing dungeons. He looked at his phone and saw his income, saying that it was too bad, because it couldn't get any lower. He knew he didn't have much money to begin with, but for this to be all his savings was pretty awful. Besides, working like he did before was simply pointless. He grabbed his head and cried out in anger. Jinwoo wondered if someone would tell him to just ask his parents for money, but that was nonsense. Now they're working 3 jobs just to pay the rent, and he's supposed to ask them for money? How is he any different from a monster then? He looked at his phone and realized he could do it even with that starting capital. The reason no one could compare to God Jinwoo was because he was a player who had never donated to this game. Even though he played it with great desire, he still managed to become the best without investing a cent. Do people really think he couldn't do the same because they were in real life now? Just be patient, and he'd definitely climb back to the top. At that moment, he was credited with 500,000 won, and he was dumbfounded. What was this? Where did he get all this money? He would never believe that this was a rookie privilege. It turned out that the money had been sent to him by his mother, who had texted him that his sister had said he'd been working hard since he woke up. And knowing him, he would never have asked her for money, but she decided to send him at least a little, so he could use it wisely. He was embarrassed when he saw the message from his mother and realized that she'd been nursing and caring for him all this time. She probably had no money at all, so why did she do this? He remembered her sitting next to his hospital bed, holding his hand and telling him that mom would always be there, so please let him wake up healthy. He almost cried and silently thanked his mother for that. Let them just wait, because he would succeed and their whole family would live in prosperity. The others had worked hard for 3 years, so now every second counted. To become the best, he had to choose a role. And to collect materials, he needs to clear dungeons. So Jinwoo bought 3 low-level summon scrolls, and first, he needed to assemble a team. Player Jean received an F-rank slime mass pet, as well as a winged butterfly pet, and an E-rank poisonous lizard pet. Jinwoo was surprised by this pet and thought that he had gotten an E-rank. He was lucky. If Rambo was also an E-rank pet, then he'd only gotten the pet twice with a 5% chance. Besides, the poisonous lizard's effectiveness is quite good. He only uses it for a short time and then recycles it. So, now that the team was assembled, he needed to drop pets, use the right runes, fight, and grow. In other words, farm runes, hunt, and tear scrolls. All of this is necessary to grow in the system. He smiled and realized he could definitely handle this kind of grind. If he could collect all 10 EX pets, then he could complete a team of EX-ranked creatures and reach the 100th floor of the Tower of Trials in no time. So first, he needed to find the remaining EX-ranked pets. When he entered, he realized it was time to get down to business. First, he needed to find a dungeon, and he typed this question into the search engine. In the mobile game, it was enough to simply click on a location. It seemed that entering was no longer as easy as in the game. He wondered how this would work in reality. Jinwoo looked ahead in surprise and started shouting, "What is this?" Everything was as usual in the player's pay area. He stared at his phone with trembling hands and muttered, "Even with a pet today, they'll talk about entering dungeons." First of all, everyone knows that even with a pet, he can't enter a dungeon, right? He was very surprised by this turn of events. Dungeon gates appear randomly anywhere. The difficulty of a dungeon can be determined by the energy emanating from it. But now the rules have changed, and now, no matter how simple the dungeon, only officially registered players can enter. He sat down on a bench, exhausted, not understanding what to do. He was incredibly unlucky. But why did he wake up just when the rules changed? At that moment, someone approached him and touched his shoulder. It was Ramba, who looked at him hopefully and offered silent support. He thanked her for this and patted her head, when suddenly he looked ahead and called his sister. Jinna asked what time he would be arriving anyway. Mom asked what he wanted for dinner. He replied that he'd eat alone, then asked if she knew that player registration was now required to enter the dungeon. Jinna exclaimed that she knew, and he asked again, didn't she specifically tell him that? Jinna chuckled and replied that she had indeed forgotten. This rule had only recently been introduced. Too many people were dying in the dungeons, so the government had to intervene. He asked again, so many people died? Jinna replied that it had been complete chaos, so now there were staff at the dungeon entrances. No one was allowed in without permission. Jinwoo wondered how much of a headache this was. He looked it up and found that there was some kind of test battle, and the registration process itself was tedious. Perhaps they didn't control the number of players that way. If everyone, blinded by greed, returned to the dungeons, cracks in the social system would inevitably develop. Jinna replied yes. There was also a rating system. He asked again, what? Jinna said that this system ranks the top 100 players in the country and the world every year, but they don't even make it into the world rankings. It's a shame. If only they had the legendary god Jinwoo, their country would rise in the rankings. Jinwoo replied, maybe? Okay, thanks for telling him. Bye. When he said goodbye to her, he silently looked into the phone and realized that for now, he had prepared for everything, so he would go rest. When he returned home, his mother had cooked delicious soup. His father was sitting next to her at the table, reading the newspaper, when he suddenly saw Jinwoo enter and ask if he was awake yet. It was only 6 a.m. Jinwoo replied yes, he needed to leave early. His mother turned to him and asked if he was leaving already. He should eat at least a rice ball before going outside. Jinwoo put on his shoes and replied that everything was fine. After which he stood up and said, Mom, Dad. He apologized for only showing them the bad side of himself so far, and thanked them for that, and he was leaving. His parents looked after him, stunned, and his father scratched his head and said it was awkward. His wife asked, will their son be okay? He told her not to worry, but the government said they were currently conducting a safety briefing, so he suggested they have breakfast and go on with their business. She paused, thinking, and begged Jinwoo to be careful, looking at the closed door. The era in which all of humanity can become players attracted early attention among all countries in South Korea due to the exceptionally high mortality rate in dungeons. The reason for this was a kind of main character syndrome caused by greed. Players deluded themselves into thinking they were the protagonists of a fantasy world. They recklessly ventured through dungeons and died. The foreign press speculated that because so many talented players were lost during this period, they concluded that this was why South Korea, a gaming power, now remains at the bottom of the rankings. So many deaths are purely due to misconceptions, and of course, it's not his place to say he played this game for 10 years himself. But frankly, it sounds a little pathetic. Weren't they scared? He watched these interviews while standing in line at registration. The office worker told him to come over, and Jinwoo submitted his application. The woman replied that his application had been accepted, and Jinwoo asked again how many people qualify for player status. She replied that only 50 people would pass the final test to earn the title of player. Jinwoo reflected that there were 1,000 people in line for him, if not more, so it wouldn't be easy. Still, even if he couldn't manage that, he certainly wouldn't be worthy of the title of one of the 5 heavenly emperors. With these thoughts in mind, he left the registration building. Sometime later, the staff in the office were discussing how they were going to select 50 people from this entire crowd. If they wanted to find talent, they needed to select more people. It was a judge from headquarters named Chan-seok. Nothing would move beyond the point of death anyway, because of those old men behind the scenes. Suddenly, after these words, an explosion occurred in their office, and everyone stood up in fear. Chan-seok started screaming, "What's going on?" A stranger emerged from the dust and addressed Chan-seok, saying, "He killed all his brothers and is sitting here so calmly. There were so many monsters behind this guy. That's why he was so confident." Chan-seok said, "This crazy freak." But at that moment, his monsters also began to burst through the floor and didn't stop at each other. The people around him discussed whether it was the man from headquarters and some kind of bandit, but why did it all happen here? Jinwoo was sitting nearby, listening to his headphones, when he suddenly realized something was going on. He turned around and asked, "What's this situation?" When he saw the confrontation, he stood up and turned to investigate. The people around him were discussing what to do. They weren't going to die here, were they? Why did the gang leader suddenly appear? Another guy replied that everything would be fine, because it was Chan-seok. He'd heard he was a real demon when it came to fighting bandits. Jinwoo looked at them questioningly and wondered, bandits? Do they really use pets to plunder and rob? Chan-seok exclaimed that this was an emergency, and everyone should summon their pets and raise their shields. Jinwoo used Ramba, who looked at him questioningly and tried to say something, but he immediately closed her mouth and whispered that they had agreed that she was not allowed to talk outside. The bandit blurted out that he was the apostle of justice, and now they'd see how long he lasted. His monster charged, and Jinwoo realized that interfering would only make things worse, so he hid behind the table and decided to simply watch their fight from the sidelines. A moment later, the entire room was ablaze, and their battle continued with bright explosions and flashes of light. The bandit screamed, "Is that all?" Chan-seok was enraged by these words, and Jinwoo uttered in a trembling voice that he was literally trash. Ramba chuckled at the fact that he didn't fight like that, and he replied, Actually, that's a shame. It looks like Chansok is being pushed. At this rate, he'll lose. This can't be happening. They're just beating up civilians without even blinking. Jinwoo wondered what he should do. If he helped and ended up getting caught up in this, he'd be killed, and he wouldn't even have a chance to live a normal life. At that moment, he approached Chansok and touched his shoulder. Chansok exclaimed that it was dangerous here and he should move away. Jinwoo replied that he wasn't using his fire turtle skill correctly. He should look at the buffers behind the blood orc. They were buffing him with fire resistance, which meant his fire energy wouldn't work. The orc's body turned red every time buff behind him used a skill, meaning he was applying fire resistance. And if that was true, then Chansok had just used his fire turtle skill and thrown the monster into the inferno. He rejoiced and asked, "Did it work?" The bandit exclaimed that the situation was dire, and he didn't understand how he knew about it. His master was destroyed and hit the ground. The bandit called him a freak, and Chansok continued to destroy his enemy. When all his pets were destroyed, the bandit began shouting at him to stop because he was giving up. He was wrong. When he turned around and saw the monster's claw approaching behind him, he screamed that he was begging for mercy and that he would never rob and kill again. Chansok told him to shut up. He knew that bank members were executed on the spot, right? The guy tearfully begged for mercy, and Chansok asked again, was he sure about that? A moment later, the bandit was killed by the ivy, his blood spilling. The people around asked, is it over? After all, they won, and Chansok did it. He's simply amazing. That's what this bandit deserves. Jinwoo watched, shocked. He might be a criminal, but rejoicing over someone being killed right before their eyes, this world was no longer the same. Without true determination, it would be impossible to survive here. At that moment, Chansok approached him and apologized. He thanked him for his help. His name was Chansok, and he was a member of the player council and headquarters. Thanks to him, they were able to catch this bandit. Jinwoo shook his hand and said it wasn't worth it, and Chansok said he'd like to reward him. Could he know which guild he belonged to? Jinwoo replied that he hadn't registered with headquarters yet, and Chansok asked, what did he mean? He recognized the buff at first glance among tens of thousands of other options, and yet he wasn't registered yet? Then perhaps he had an ID? If they could confirm his identity, everything would be fine. Jinwoo said yes and handed over his ID. Chansok took it in his hands and thanked him, then said that after verifying the data, he would receive a reward according to the rules. Jinwoo replied, okay, then he'll leave it to him. Chansok watched him go in surprise and immediately called his colleague, saying that he had just sent him some data. Let him check this person. When Jinwoo went outside, the bright sun appeared. There, Jinwoo bought a delicious pastry for Ramba and realized how simple it was. Perhaps it was hard for her to remain silent. She immediately pounced on this delicious pastry, and Jinwoo thought that he had heard other players sometimes argue with their pets. But Ramba was happy with just a cream bun. In any case, nothing terrible would happen, right? He hadn't intended to interfere, but if it weren't for him, they would all have died there. The world had changed much more than he thought. It seemed he couldn't put off hunting any longer. Now he needs to collect summoning scrolls and summon the next pet as soon as possible. The priority is the drill instructor and the explosive dragon. They're E and D ranks, so he should be able to get them from their low-level summoning scrolls. He got up from the bench and asked Ramba, okay, should they go now? Sometime later, while Chansok was taking a walk, he received a call from the same employee he'd requested, and Chansok was very surprised to learn that he'd been hospitalized for 3 years after an accident. So that's why he wasn't registered as a player. Well, if it was 3 years ago, then that's when the world turned upside down. Accidents were common in that chaos, so it all makes sense. And right after his discharge, he applied to register as a player, and when he heard about it, Chansok dropped all his documents and phone and exclaimed, what? He picked up Jinwoo's personal file, and his hands began shaking. He didn't understand what was going on. His colleague was asking again, what's wrong? Chansok replied, no, by the way, there's an exam this month. This time he'll handle it himself, and he shouldn't even ask why. He replied, okay, he understood. Chansok mused that it was one thing to wake up after an accident, and quite another to register as a player immediately afterward. He seemed incredibly adaptable. He could become a real talent. After some time, the protagonist got dressed and said on the way out that he knew there would be a lot of people. But were they really all here for this preparation? He needed to beat all these competitors to become a player. But in his opinion, it was easy as pie. After all, no one knew more about games than he did. When everyone was already assembled, he realized it was all about to begin, when he was suddenly dumbfounded and saw Chansok standing in front of him. He announced that he was an examiner from the main office, and that from that moment on, they would begin preparing for the written exam. After some time, the two of them gathered in a cafe, and Chansok asked again, is he a little surprised to see him? Jinwoo replied, yes, he never thought he would be the examiner. Chansok replied that he thought it was fate and how his preparation had gone. Jinwoo paused, then remembered that such questions often came up on the written test. Looking at the pet combination here, Jinwoo realized that this was the combination he'd told him about. He should at least ask permission before using it. He said that everything hadn't gone so badly, although it had gotten a bit boring. Chansok replied that it was a relief. He'd summoned him separately because of the reward he'd mentioned. But before they got down to business, he wanted to ask one more thing. Was he, by any chance, a gamer? Jinwoo was surprised by this question. A gamer is someone who's played Summoner's Battle before, and no matter how long they've played, anyone who's ever launched the game is considered a gamer. 70% of the best Korean players are gamers, and it would be strange if he knew about summoning without ever playing the game. But he replied that he had played, and Chan-seok replied that it was exactly as he thought. And how long, if it's not a secret? Jinwoo realized it was a practically dead game that no one really played, and if he said 10 years he'd be immediately exposed. He said he played for about a year, and Chan-seok exclaimed, "Is that true?" Jinwoo asked in surprise. "What's the problem? Maybe that wasn't enough?" Chan-seok asked again. "He played this dead game for a whole year?" That impressed him. Jinwoo confirmed that it was something like that. Most better Korean players haven't played for even 6 months, and he's played for a whole year. At that point, Chan-seok apologized and announced that they had prepared 2 awards, and he should please choose the one that suits him best. Jinwoo replied that he understood, and Chan-seok said that for the first award, within his authority, he could immediately register him as a player, with automatic registration and immediate employment. He could also offer a position at the main office. The second option, a cash reward of 5 million won, made Jinwoo think the choice was obvious, and Chan-seok asked again, well, what would he say? It wasn't just registration, but a job at the main office, which is harder to get than at a large corporation. Obviously, that would be the first option. But suddenly, Jinwoo replied that he'd take the money, and Chan-seok asked again, what? But registering as a player usually takes a long time. Jinwoo thanked him for the offer, but he'd probably decline. He could register himself, and he'd never planned on working at the office anyway. He was already busy searching for pets. He had no time to waste. When he left the office, people around him asked if that was President Jinwoo. He replied, yes. And a girl approached him and informed him that, as he'd heard, completing the dungeon for the day of the week was practically an exam. This time, he'd be heading to Tuesday's dungeon. The test would be timed, so he had to finish as quickly as possible. While they were discussing this, Chan-seok was watching from the sidelines, surprised to see that he seemed to understand runes and pets better than anyone else. Why had he figured this out on his own? Thanks to the challenger, Jinwoo, he realized how narrow-minded he'd been. Finally, such talent had emerged in Korea. If all went well, he might even make it into the world rankings. Chan-seok was surprised that the girl thought everything was so good. He'd never seen these proud professors react like this. Perhaps they should have offered better conditions? At that moment, the professor announced that the explanation was complete and he could enter. She created a portal, and Jinwoo decided to begin. When he entered, he found himself with his pets. The system informed him that the rooms were swarming with highly poisonous slimes and that he should destroy them and leave the dungeon as quickly as possible. Jinwoo called Ramba, who responded by starting to buff him. At that moment, Tolgo began screaming loudly and attacking the monster. Tuesday's dungeon was a labyrinth. He needed to defeat the slimes and find a way to the boss room. This was the dungeon where beginners often spent a lot of time wandering. But the slimes were slow, so he could ignore them and simply run forward. He'd been through this dungeon so many times that finding his way was a piece of cake. He saw a room in the distance and shouted to run there. If they took a shortcut here, they'd come straight to it. But suddenly the system announced the boss had appeared. He realized that this was their first time meeting in person. Right? A huge, gigantic slime appeared in front of him, and the guys stopped. He shouted at his pets to give it their all, and they both exclaimed and charged. When Tolgo pounced on the monster, he slammed his fists into it, sending bright beams of light, piercing it from all sides. Jinwoo realized that this was the reason Ramba was disabled. He was just a Frank's pet. But thanks to that, his attack speed was incredible. He could already imagine how powerful another pet with that kind of attack speed would be. A moment later, the system reported that the boss had been defeated and the dungeon cleared, with a clear time of 5 minutes and 32 seconds. That's quite slow, considering that when he was a god, Jinwoo had cleared it in less than a minute. The system congratulated him for breaking the South Korean record and earning a special achievement. Jinwoo was surprised and asked, what? The system reported that the rewards for the first clear were Advanced Summon Scroll 3 and an additional reward, Low-Level Digging Potion 2. He was surprised and realized that this was the best record in South Korea. When the people in the office saw that the record had been broken, they were dumbfounded. Tuesday's dungeon was cleared in 5 minutes 32 seconds. That's a huge reduction in time. Did Kyungho really find a new combination? Or wait, was it Jinwoo? She'd never heard of him. And he didn't look like a player. So it wasn't a player who broke the record, and the #1 player's record at that? How did that happen? The discussion continued, and the girl declared that he truly was amazing. Chan-seok chuckled and realized that he was undoubtedly a true professional. This was their national treasure, and they must get him at any cost. He slammed the table and asked if they wanted to survive. At the very least, they needed to prevent him from moving to another country. He proposed registering Jinwoo as a player immediately. They asked, what? Even without a qualifying match? As they all knew, speedrunning records are divided into national and world records. Kyungho holds first place in Korea with a time of 6 minutes 41 seconds. Rachel holds the world's #1 spot with a time of 2 minutes and 25 seconds. He's broken the Korean record, so will there be any point in the qualifying match? He believes that talent deserves special treatment. Sometime later, When Jin Woo approached this tall building, he would never have thought that 5 minutes was a record. Could this really be the level of South Korea? Suddenly, he was met by Chan Sok, who began shouting at him with admiration that he really wanted to meet him. He ran towards him joyfully and said that he had seen his speedrunning record and that it was simply incredible. He managed to break the South Korean record on his first try. Besides, the labyrinth in Tuesday's dungeon is incredibly confusing. Jinwoo chuckled and replied that that was probably true. It's like praising a fish for its swimming ability. Chanseok offered him this first. It would be a player's license certificate. He immediately registered his name as a player. He has nothing more to prove, Mr. Jinwoo. Jinwoo was delighted by this, and Chanseok added, "Can I ask how he broke the record?" Jinwoo paused, looking at his ID. He realized that if he revealed everything he knew now, South Korea's status would skyrocket. The problem was what would happen next. At best, he would gain wealth and fame with state support. At worst, he could simply be kidnapped and squeezed dry of every last drop of information. He asked Chan Sok. He understands that asking such questions is rude, right? Chan Sok replied that he apologized, as the third step in a player's progression was a very sensitive topic, shared only with those closest to him. He clenched his fist and begged for understanding, as South Korea desperately needed talent. He didn't seem like a bad person. He immediately transferred the promised money, and he had a pleasant personality. He was also quick-witted, so maybe he should use the government to his advantage. If he played his cards right, he could develop much faster. At that point, he turned to Chan Sok and asked if they could move elsewhere. He decided to be frank, and Chan Sok again asked for help. Their headquarters needs his knowledge, Mr. Jin Woo. According to their records, he was confined to a hospital bed for 3 years. Jin Woo asked again, had he checked his background? Chan Sok replied that he apologized for that, but a skilled, unregistered player could have been a member of some gang. Jin Woo asked again, since he was registered, he wouldn't be investigating him, right? He should never do that again. He replied, yes, and reflected that usually when he mentioned the state, people were alarmed and tried to cooperate as best they could. But this guy didn't even bat an eyelid. He clearly knew his worth. After Jin Woo drank a glass of tea, he mentioned something he'd been thinking about. What exactly would he get if he helped the state? Chan Sok replied that it would be his cooperation, and Jin Woo looked at him questioningly. Chan Sok replied that he felt a little awkward saying so himself, but he held a fairly high position in the headquarters, and the headquarters chairman was elected by popular vote. So if he did well, he would receive many votes and could rise even higher. Jin Woo realized he was just like a politician, and Chan Sok therefore decided to provide him with all the support he could within his authority. Jin Woo thought this didn't impress him. The reward was vague, and since he was a civil servant, he couldn't spend the funds as he pleased. In that case, he proposed doing so just for 1 month. Chan Sok asked again, what? Jin Woo replied that since he had just registered, he would focus on his development for a month and would seek support as needed. If everything was fine, they would continue their collaboration. If not, he would return everything he had received or provide equivalent information. Chan Sok was surprised. So he was going to use him as a personal secretary for a whole month? There was nothing he could do about it. He would definitely win if he stuck close to him, so he replied, okay. They had a deal. The guys shook hands. First, he needed something. Please let him keep his new record secret. He was worried about his safety. Chan Sok asked again, what? If it was about his safety, Mr. Jin Woo, then. But before he could finish, he realized no. He couldn't hope for protection from headquarters that couldn't even handle one gang. Jin Woo understood this perfectly well, so Chan Sok replied that he understood everything and would do everything possible to hide his record, but rumors could still leak out. He replied, no problem. Then he wanted to leave. Chan Sok wished him a quick meeting. Jin Woo understood that perfectly well and made sure he would remain silent. He looked at his phone screen with a smile and asked what kind of reward he had received. After a while, when he opened the system, he realized that these rewards were simply incredible. Besides the reforging potion, he received high-level summon scrolls, as expected, a first-time reward that only gives out once, and it's truly something. He wants to open them right now, but he can't risk it with only 3 scrolls. He's better off just selling them and raising some money. Right, there's one more thing. All these players are only available to players registered at headquarters. Almost all transactions are processed through this. At least, that's what the chairman said when he set it up. Now he wants to see how much they're worth, but when he opened this one, he was stunned. This one cost 3 million won. So he earned 9 million just by running a dungeon in 5 minutes? That's crazy. This is just the beginning. And if things continue like this, his entire family will be well off. He'll make sure they never have to worry about money again. Only then will he sell the high-level ones first, and use the money he made to buy low-level summon scrolls. The Drill Instructor and Explosive Dragon are pets that can currently only remove B-rank monsters. Until he can take advantage of this, he should only sell low-level scrolls. When he started scrolling through his feed, he assumed that low-level scrolls were just junk that accumulated while completing dungeons, so why were they priced at 5,001? Besides, there were far more sellers than buyers. There were no lower prices. In such cases, he called his sister, and she asked if something was wrong. He decided he just wanted to ask her something, and after explaining the whole situation to Jin Ah, She replied that it was because headquarters was buying them up. He asked again, why? She replied, who knows? People say it's to support players. They're buying up summoning scrolls en masse with government money, and the minimum price is 5,000 won. But the daily purchase quantity is limited. Since they can always sell them to headquarters, no one is even thinking about lowering the price. He said everything was clear, and Jinna said she'd heard that this shop might be shut down. The protagonist asked again, why? She replied that this policy had been in place from the very beginning, so that a pile of unnecessary low-level scrolls would accumulate. Jinwoo asked again, is that so? He thanked her for telling him everything, then hung up. So they had accumulated an excess of low-level scrolls, right? In that case, he returned to Chansok, who was happy to see him. As he could see, he had already missed him and didn't think he'd be back so soon. The protagonist chuckled at how things had turned out, and Chansok asked if he needed anything. Jinwoo replied that he wanted some low-level summoning scrolls, and Chansok asked again, aren't they mid-level or high-level? And how many did he need? He replied, as many as possible, and Chansok reflected that they received 50,000 daily. So giving them away wasn't a problem, but he might give them away if he was planning on reselling them. He replied, nothing special. There's already an oversupply on the market, and they're not selling, so he's going to exploit it himself. Chansok realized he seemed to have some kind of plan. He wasn't like the others, and he was purposefully collecting low-level summoning scrolls. Could he really have something special in mind? Chansok smiled and said there was one condition. Jinwoo asked again, what? He wanted him to provide at least some useful information. He was the people's elected chairman, but if it became known that he was simply handing out scrolls purchased with taxpayers' money, the people's trust in him would be weakened. Therefore, if he provided him with the information, he would give him an equivalent number of low-level scrolls. After all, he needed some kind of backup too. Jinwoo realized he wouldn't just hand them over, and it was even better this way, because if he gave him valuable information, he would reward him generously. First of all, there was such a thing as a time record. This is the reward for first place in the country. 3 high-level summon scrolls for each dungeon. However, this reward can be re-earned if another player breaks the record. Therefore, if players take turns improving the record, even by just 1 second, they will be able to receive the maximum rewards. This can strengthen them in the country. Chansok replied that everything was clear, and they used this method. The current players had already received their share, but there were many players who had never received this reward before, so it wouldn't be a big problem. Jinwoo announced that the second piece of information he would reveal was about this strategy for completing Tuesday's dungeon. Chansuk clapped his hands and said that, as he thought, it was the same method he used. Jinwoo realized it wasn't him. The 5 emperors had used it. He wouldn't have believed it if he'd said he'd memorized all the labyrinths in advance. With this method, anyone could complete this labyrinth in just 3 minutes. Chansuk was surprised and asked again, only 3 minutes? Jinwoo raised his hand and announced that they needed to clearly agree on a price for this information. In addition to the low-level scrolls they'd mentioned, he wanted 50 high-level ones as well. How could he handle such an offer? Chansok was dumbfounded and began screaming. 150 million? Jinwoo replied, that was quite cheap. This method could be used not only in low-level dungeons but also in difficult ones. After all, the rewards for breaking records there could reach 1 billion. Chansok replied, of course, fine. If the information turns out to be correct, he'll immediately transfer 150 million. And he'll supply him with 10,000 low-level summoning scrolls daily. Jinwoo smiled and said he wouldn't regret it. After a while, everyone was assembled, and the subordinates asked the chairman why he had gathered them so suddenly. Chansok replied that he had gathered them to test something. One of them asked again, but he wouldn't have gathered them for nothing, so this wasn't just another experiment? Chansok suggested, but they knew he had recently broken the record in the Tuesday dungeon, right? The guys replied that they had heard about it. His name was Jinwoo, right? Chansok replied that he had managed to get an excellent strategy abroad and tested it with a player named Jinwoo, and the results were excellent. The guys asked again, was it true? So that's why he had forbidden the information from being spread. So he had gathered them for this. But before they could finish their sentence, Chansuk replied, exactly, they're going to smash the Tuesday dungeons. The key pet for this dungeon is this guy. It's a spotted Komodo. This pet is a summonable lizard-like monitor lizard the size of an adult human. It has strong defense and decent attack, a typical tanky damage dealer. At least that's what the publicly available information says, but in reality, it's difficult to level up, which is expected for a rank B pet. Compared to other rank B pets, this creature's damage and defense are so-so, so it's considered useless. However, players didn't know one thing. Its main food is giant slimes. Once released into a dungeon, it immediately begins hunting giant slimes, allowing for a quick dungeon clear. The system reported that Tuesday's dungeon ranked first in Korea, Chunsik, with a time of 5 minutes 29 seconds. After a while, the guys started shouting that the chairman was right. They reached the boss's room in less than 4 minutes. Does he really love to eat that much? This guy is a veritable gold mine, and now there's no need to worry about the cleansing agents. Chansuk watched from the sidelines in bewilderment. A few days later, information surfaced online about players in Korea constantly setting new records in the Tuesday dungeon. Chansuk was delighted that it was confirmed. Jinwoo wasn't just some Gilmer freshman. It was good that he'd decided to create a team just for him. This team would include these three. Several personal files of various players lay before him. After a while, Jinwoo grabbed his phone with a trembling hand and, seeing the amount, wondered, is it really that easy to make money these days? That bearded man was so generous. How many cream buns could this buy? And besides, the system reported that the summon scroll inventory was a low-level summon scroll worth 10,000. 10,000 low-level summon scrolls that the employee had given him that morning had fulfilled his promise, so now it was his turn. He turned to Ramba and asked, is she ready? She replied, yes, God, yes, Allah, spirits of the heavens and earth. Please let their Jinwoo get a good pet. This was a summoning ritual practiced since the time of the god Jinwoo. Jinwoo decided they needed to get started. The endless farming was about to begin. He tore the scroll in front of him and a moment later collapsed to the ground around a pile of pets. In an hour, he'd already used 3,600 scrolls and he hadn't gotten a decent pet yet. Why were they all weak ranks? Ramba asked again, who said it would be easy? He thought an EX rank pet was so easy to win. Jinwoo asked again, but why? He got one on his first try. Ramba replied that it was pure luck. Getting one from 100,000 scrolls wouldn't be enough, let alone 10. He asked again, what is she talking about? Ramba replied, does he know nothing about the summoning system? Jinwoo asked again, the summoning system? She replied that there were exactly 10 times fewer pets than players. For example, the horned caterpillars he just summoned, there were 80,000 of them. But most importantly, isolated pets were unique. Chan Sok was stunned and asked again, why? Ramba replied that she didn't know why, that only he could summon isolated EX rank pets. She knew for sure. He breathed a sigh of relief and realized that there were tens of thousands of creature types, 800 million of each. And from all this diversity, he needed to pull out a single EX rank creature. It would have been easier for him to just win several times in a row. Ramba told him not to worry, because once a pet has been summoned, it won't drop again until it's sold. For example, if all 800 million horned caterpillars are summoned, the horned caterpillars will never appear in future summons. Jinwoo suggested it was almost impossible anyway, and Ramba wondered if they should try mid-tier scrolls. But no, that wouldn't work. They're expensive, and they're rare. He kept saying the chances were slim, but he had no choice but to keep trying, so he tore up another scroll and shouted, hoping for it to appear. Ramba wished him luck. Sometime later, evening came, and Jinwoo lay down on his bed, tired, and said he was going to die. Ramba, lying on the pillow nearby, said she wanted a cream bun. He said he'd opened 140,000 summoning scrolls in 2 weeks, and Ramba said she almost died. Jinwoo looked away and thought about how he'd even rented a room next to the player area just to synthesize pets. He dreamed of cream buns and supposed he couldn't live off his parents forever. So maybe he should go synthesize pets today? Ramba continued to shout about cream buns. Sometime later, they found themselves in the Fusion Center, a former hotel. Jinwoo found himself inside and mused that just as the Jamsil Tower had become the Test Tower, so had the other buildings. For example, this hotel had become the Fusion Center. He thought the buffet here used to be quite popular. There were ATMs nearby, and he approached them with number 125. Ramba told him not to make a mistake and to look carefully before inserting it. He replied, of course, it was their turn now and they should go. When he entered the room, a system appeared before him, and he placed his hopes on Ramba. She replied that they could handle it, and the system announced, welcome to the Fusion Center. He should try fusing their pets. The Wind Fairy had been registered. Did he want to synthesize the Wind Fairy? He replied, yes, after which the system announced, the Fire Lizard is sacrificed and disappears. This happened several times, and Ramba glowed with a bright blue flame. He realized that this was indeed a lot, and a moment later, the fusion was complete. The Wind Fairy's level increased to 21, and her intelligence increased by 2. Just think, only level 21 after 140,000 scrolls. Ramba asked, so how strong is she now? Jinwoo replied that she was the best. The maximum level was 100. At this rate, it would take forever. A few days later, Chan Sok found himself opposite his employee and asked, Byung-jin, are things going unusually well today? Byung-jin replied, yes, but Byung-jin couldn't understand why he was so happy. Chan Sok, meanwhile, was pondering that now that he had created a talent management team, he needed to invest fully in Jinwoo. Because of this, he asked Byung-jin what Jinwoo was doing now. He thought for a moment and replied that it seemed he was still opening summoning scrolls and that there were even more of them today. Chan Sok asked in surprise, what? He's still doing this? He answered, and then asked if she could use the 150 million won she'd received to buy more low-level scrolls. Chan Sok didn't understand what was going on, and Byung-jin blurted out that he'd asked if they could be bought at a reduced price, and he'd replied that he'd check, but the Bureau of Management already looked down on them for constantly buying. What were they going to do? Chan Sok wondered if he was putting everything into unsellable and low-level scrolls and reinvesting it. He definitely had some kind of plan. He wanted to sell them to him for half price, and Byung-jin asked, what half price? If they were caught offering such privileges, but before he could finish, Chan Sok told him not to worry. Jinwoo could become a hero in Korea in the future, and when it was revealed that he supported him no matter what, his rating would skyrocket. For now, he just has to do as he's told. Chan Sok looked out the window and decided this should remain between them, Jin-ah and Dae-sung. After some time, Jinwoo had used an incredible number of scrolls, but still nothing worked. He was holding 1,558 scrolls in his hand and was already feeling sick of them. Ramba asked, "How much longer can this go?" He replied that he would do this until they both died. At that moment, a girl in heels approached them and said hello. Jinwoo looked up and asked, "What?" She replied that she was pleased to meet him. Her name was Yujia from headquarters. Jinwoo scratched his head in confusion and asked what brought her here. She replied, "Oh, nothing special." She was about the summoning scrolls that he had spoken about with the chairman last time. Jinwoo replied that he understood and asked if there was some way to come to an agreement. Yujia replied that they had discussed it and, considering Mr. Jinwoo's recent achievements, had decided to sell them to him for half price this time as a special exception. He exclaimed, "Really?" Yujia replied, "Yes," and that he had also decided to allocate an additional 100 million won for talent management expenses. Jinwoo was delighted and embarrassed, but Yujia said he must keep it a secret. Jinwoo replied, "Of course, don't worry." She hoped he understood that it was for the sake of their relationship. Jinwoo confidently replied that he understood, and Yujia suggested that he must be busy, so she would leave. He watched her go, thinking that the chairman was determined to verify his identity, and that to repay him, he needed to achieve EX rank as soon as possible. Sometime later, evening fell, and they were still searching for these pets. He wondered how long they could go on. This won't end until they get a drill instructor and an explosive dragon mage. Ramba screamed that her head would explode from the sound of the explosion. A moment later, the system reported that he had received an F rank white snake, and he realized there seemed to be no other way out. Since they hadn't yet decided to go that far, they had to at least knock them out of their stubbornness. He begged, "Please, let me get a drill instructor and an explosive dragon mage." He begged for it, and immediately a bright golden glow appeared before him, and he asked, "What is it?" The effect was exactly the same as when he received Ramba. They both exclaimed in surprise, and the system reported that a low-level summon scroll had been used, and player Jinwoo had received an EX rank explosive dragon mage pet. They exclaimed with happiness and joy and began to cry, because they had done it and everything had worked out. Now they could die. But at that moment, Jinwoo came to his senses and decided that now was not the time to relax, and they couldn't stop while they were on the wave. Ramba asked again, "On a wave?" He replied that a wave was when something good dropped, and you had to keep going to get even more good pets. He continued tearing up those scrolls, and a moment later, the system reported that he received an EX rank training instructor pet. Ramba was surprised. Was that really how waves worked? Jinwoo was delighted. It had finally happened. He'd gotten them. These were the very pets he'd wanted. When the drill instructor found himself in the middle of nowhere, he asked where he was. Initially, he was an E-ranker with low combat ability, so he wasn't a popular pet, but his whole value was in his obsession with training. Growth increases with training, and his charisma overwhelms other pets. The instructor himself is weak and his basic skills unremarkable, but once he breaks down and gains the constructor skill, he significantly accelerates their growth. This skill could therefore make other pets stronger, which is why he always outperformed other players. Ramba assumed she didn't actually want to get stronger. Jinwoo waved and told the instructor it had been a while. He asked again, "Instructor?" He remembered the nickname and began shouting. Could he really be the god Jinwoo? Jinwoo replied that he was, and both pets were dumbfounded. The instructor bowed and said it was incredible. After being isolated for some unknown reason, he never thought he'd see him again. Jinwoo reflected that, as he'd thought, Ramba and the instructor were just as he'd raised them. He was honored to see them again. At that moment, a dragon mage approached him and asked if he really was the god Jinwoo. It was the first time Jinwoo had heard Pokryon speak. A summoned pet of the magic type, D-rank sorcerer Pokryon. She was sealed, and although she was unsuccessful among the apprentice mages, an ancient fire dragon sleeps in her heart, making her a fighter who deals high amounts of fire damage in an area. The skill itself is unremarkable, but what if it's the instructor? The system reported that Pokryon's wave released a dragon-shaped flame forward. He gained incredible absorption skill, and this absorption skill couldn't be obtained without an instructor, so only he could use it properly. Pokryon exclaimed that she had missed him very much, and Jinwoo, embarrassed, replied that he had too. She was, as always, incredibly sweet. He asked them to please not mention this in front of strangers and not to call him God Jinwoo. The guys replied that they understood everything, and Jinwoo suggested that they should now go home and get some sleep. When they arrived at the apartment, Jinwoo was tired and immediately fell asleep. The pets gathered around his bed and sat silently on the floor. The instructor turned to Ramba and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Pokryon also said that it was indeed a long time. They could call her Ramba? She replied, "He's an instructor, right? They saw him a month ago. She was already here when he was summoned, so now she is his senior." The instructor replied that this was true, but it didn't matter. He only wanted to say one thing: they were too weak. He clenched his fist and shouted that to be of any help to their master, they had to stand much stronger, and therefore, even when he slept, they had to continue training. And the first would be Pokryon. She needs to sit down and focus on her magic. When he was awakened, he would open the absorption for her first. She replied that she understood everything, and the instructor looked into the eyes of Ramba, who was hiding fearfully because of him. and told her that she should increase the speed of her swings so that she could do strength training with him. Ramba exclaimed in grief. Strength training? But she was a fairy. He asked again, didn't she want to be of use to her master? Ramba replied that of course she did, and the instructor pressed her and told her to start swinging this frying pan. Since it was her first day, they would start small, just 5,000 swings. Ramba cried out in horror when she heard that number, and, with a trembling hand, reached out to Jinwoo, begging him to save her, but Jinwoo knew nothing and was asleep. Sometime later, Yujia came to Chanseok's office, and he asked, can she no longer give him low-level summoning scrolls? Yujia replied, yes, an official notification had just arrived, and it was the director's order. Chanseok was startled and thought, he was always busy? Why was he suddenly bothered by such a trivial matter? Besides, they were demanding a detailed report on how he had used low-level summoning scrolls up to that point. Yujia suggested that the deputy was probably behind it, and Chanseok exclaimed that the jerk was picking on his every move. What should they do now? She had prepared the report, but if management didn't hand over the scrolls, they would have nothing to give Jinwoo. Chanseok was thinking that the delivery time for the scrolls was approaching, and suddenly his phone rang. Yujia asked again, what's wrong? Chanseok suggested he thought he didn't need any more low-level summon scrolls and needed to deal with this jerk instead. At that moment, he saw a message from Jinwoo, who said he no longer needed low-level summon scrolls and had gotten what he wanted, so he thanked him for it. Sometime later, on Gwanaksan Mountain near Songbawi Station, Gwacheon, Gyeonggi Province. The protagonist appeared there and explained what a regular dungeon meant. There are 4 types of dungeons in the game. The first is the daily dungeon, which requires gathering materials from accessible locations on a specific day of the week. The second is the Tower of Trials, a much more difficult dungeon that pushes players to their limits. The rewards are incredible, but the chance of dying is high. And the third is the Demon Dragon of Chaos, a raid dungeon that requires group formations. But that hasn't been added to the game yet, so he'll explain it some other time. Everything else was just regular dungeons, which was exactly what he was heading towards. In SB, they were called staged dungeons, but in reality, they spawn randomly. You could form groups for them, but he didn't need one. He looked ahead and saw a gate with guards standing near it. If the dungeon wasn't cleared in time, a breach would occur, and monsters would burst out, and he needed to clear it quickly. The guard informed him that if he wanted to enter the dungeon, he needed to check his license. Jinwoo handed over his ID and replied, okay, he's here for the inspection. Please let him be careful. Jinwoo entered the dungeon and a moment later saw bright magical sparks above him. Monsters were fighting among themselves and their swords clashed. He realized what an enslaved dungeon looked like. Everything there was very dark, with bright, red, terrifying colors that were overwhelming him. People started shouting that the orcs were climbing up, that they should attack him and pour boiling water on him. Let it die. Jinwoo thought that when he played this game, everything seemed unreal, but now he was watching all the horror unfolding and asked, this is real war, right? He needed to collect his thoughts and just do what he always did. He closed his eyes and ordered his pets to prepare immediately. The system reported that he was summoning a wind fairy, a drill instructor, and an explosive dragon mage. He also summoned a D-rank golden fairy and a mini Kong. He simply couldn't find better tanks or a D-rank healer. Jinwoo turned to Ramba and told her to buff attack speed. She said she understood, and he ordered the dragon to prepare to provide cover fire from the rear. Then he turned to Mini Kong and told them to go straight for the orc boss. Mini Kong charged, and Jinwoo thought about how simple the plan for clearing the orc dungeon was. A moment later, a powerful explosion occurred, and he realized he simply needed to defeat the giant orc at the end, and that would be it. This huge orc began to attack them with its huge, sharp weapon, but the guys struggled, and Ramba shouted that Mini Kong would do it. Jinwoo was tense for a moment, but after a moment, they were able to cut the creature in half. Jinwoo knew it was all because of the EX rank, and it was on a completely different level than the base form. In any case, it was actually easier than he thought. The knights realized that they were acting in concert with them, and they were incredibly strong. They wondered if they had any hope of survival. Mini Kong continued to charge straight at the orcs, and Ramba watched him. She asked if they didn't like doing this. Jinwoo asked her to stop fooling around, and she apologized. The instructor asked how dare they throw an axe at their master. Let them die right now. The dragon mage whispered special spells and decided to attack with a bright, long flame. This was the Pakrion wave. When this wave reached its limit, the system reported that it was releasing a dragon-shaped flame forward. All the monsters were engulfed in this flame. And at that moment, the instructor abruptly cut off the last monster, who fell to the ground, and the system reported that they had cleared the dungeons. Ramba exclaimed with joy, as did Pokrion, who was surprised by how easily the trials had been completed. The system reported that the explosive dragon mage's level had been increased to 5, and the explosive dragon mage's intelligence had been increased by 2. The drill instructor's level had been increased to 5, and the critical strike chance for drill had been increased by 1%. A reward had also been received, a medium summon scroll. Jinwoo realized that this medium summon scroll cost 500,000 won. Just think, he'd earned 500,000 won in just 2 minutes. He urgently needed to find the next dungeons, since he could level up his pets and earn money at the same time. It was time for him to turn his life into an endless grind. Sometime later, Chansok sat in the office, groaning with sadness. Yujia approached and asked, "Seriously, where did he get the confidence to make such bets?" He said in a trembling voice. "That jerk started it himself." He asked them to calm down, the people sitting next to him at the table, and one of the office staff said he was only giving advice because he felt Mr. Chairman was wasting the budget. How dare he even call himself a talent development team if he can't produce a single worthy rookie? Chansok started to get angry and shake with rage, and at that moment, the guy mentioned that not a single talent they had mentored, Mr. Chairman, had made it to the national team. This mentally struck him right in the heart, and he continued to say, "Is he really that upset over a new record in a test dungeon? Over such nonsense? Seriously?" Chansok continued to rage and called the guy a freak. He would gladly have spoken his mind about him, but the players he mentored made it to the national team every year. He might be an arrogant jerk, but his skills are something to be reckoned with, and yet, he wasn't going to tolerate this anymore. Chansok asked what he would say if a talent he supervised made it onto the national team. Hisu made a suggestion, but he wanted to bet on it. There were only 10 spots on the national team. He then proposed a bet on whose talent would rise higher. Chansok replied that they had an agreement. The loser would publicly admit they'd rather resign, and the penalty for refusing would be 1 billion won. Chansok asked if they should perhaps drop a contract right now. Their director had asked them not to argue and didn't know how to intervene. Yujia frowned and said, "Please don't tell her he only did this because he believed in Jin Woo. He was certainly incredible, but he was just a gamer and inferior to registered players in every way." Chansok replied that he knew everything, but he believed in him. He was confident that if they supported him, he would gain a wealth of valuable information for them. Yujia replied that even if he said so, then... But before she could finish her thoughts, Byung-jin suddenly burst into their office and shouted, "Mr. Chairman!" Chansok stood up from the table and asked what happened. Byung-jin replied that he had asked him to check on a player who had recently been single-handedly defending dozens of D-rank dungeons, right? So it was Jin Woo. Chansok exclaimed, "What?" Yujia asked again. "A player who registered just a month ago clears a D-rank dungeon in less than 5 minutes?" Chansok asked with a smile. "Well, she sees that?" He said so. He said Jinwoo was simply amazing, so he knew he could trust him. He knew it. His eyes hadn't deceived him. When Jinwoo got home, he checked his phone and saw 26 million won in his account. He had earned a whopping 16 million won today. For 4 days, he'd been frantically clearing the 160th D-rank dungeon, and he'd earned all this money from selling every medium summon scroll he'd received. His blood, sweat, and tears had been poured into this, and his time had finally come. Now he needed to split it all up. This account was for daily expenses, and later he'd create a family account and this savings account, setting aside 10 million won a month for himself. He seemed to be in a dream when he thought about these numbers. And finally, the player account. He was going to spend all this money on his pets. Money is money, but the most important thing now was his value as a player. Everyone had already surpassed level 30 through dungeons, so it was time to collect runes and enhance them. And to do that, he needed to farm daily dungeons. To quickly clear them, he needed a main pet. I wondered if there was anything on the market. When he opened this page in his browser, he froze and asked, "What? Are ranks worth 20 million on average? Is there any announcement about selling ranks or ranks at all?" He supposes it's logical, since even high-level scrolls only have a 1% chance of reaching rank B. Oh well, that's why he made sure he had someone he could rely on in advance. So he dialed the phone, and after a while, another subordinate burst into the chairman's office and exclaimed in surprise. Chansok asked again, "What happened?" He replied that he had received a new request from player Jin Woo, and Chansok exclaimed, "What? What did he ask for? This new request and the upcoming new achievements?" The guy replied that it scared him how happy he was. At that moment, he showed him the phone screen and said this. There was a message on the phone with a shopping list of the pets he had decided to give them. He wanted them to buy all of this for him. Chansok exclaimed, "Is that all?" He clutched his head and couldn't understand. If headquarters could buy all of this, he wouldn't be using a rank pet right now. But if they bought all this, what would he tell them? He said he'd reveal a secret method for clearing daily dungeons. It wasn't just for Monday and Wednesday dungeons, but for all daily dungeons. When Chansok thought about it, he seemed quite generous and replied, "Okay, he'll talk to the director." After a while, Chansok slammed his fist on the table and called someone an old fart and a stupid old man. Why was their country always in last place? That's why. His subordinates didn't understand what was wrong with him and realized he'd been refused. Asking something like that was just too much. Yujia wondered if all the chairmen had that many casualties, and Byung-jin asked what the director had said. Chansok replied that he'd told him to bring proof or show a recording of his progress before asking. And how was he supposed to beat this without pets? Yujia thought for a moment, and he realized that if his information was true, they would hit the jackpot. An absolute jackpot, and those idiots at headquarters didn't understand it. It was quite offensive, and Chansok was surprised by such words. Yujia continued to say that selling such potential for just 1.2 billion, wasn't that offensive? Chansok asked what she meant. Yujia addressed him as the chairman and asked if perhaps she could handle it for him. Byung-jin turned to look at her, stunned, and Chansok thought if he were to think that, she's from the family that owns the Daesung group, the fourth granddaughter of the head of South Korea's leading conglomerate. She received an elite education, as befits the heiress of such a company, and in this direction, she could become a player. And the player she's most interested in lately is, of course, Jin Woo. He knows too much and is also brazen enough to have managed to strike a deal with the government. What if they created a management team specifically for him, investing in his development in exchange for profit? Their approach would be radically different from that of the managers. But she was sure, after all, it was no small sum. Yujia asked again, is he worried about her finances? Chon-sok answered, perplexed, no. And she replied that they don't have to worry about money. But first, she needed to meet with Jin Woo again. When Yujia was alone, she suddenly noticed Jin Woo approaching them. One of the employees bowed and wished them a pleasant stay. Jin Woo thanked him and thought, isn't that surprisingly generous? She'd sent him a message saying she'd like to answer his inquiries and suggesting they meet and discuss everything in detail. Just think, they'd gotten so excited over just one piece of information. It seemed hard for her to refuse. Thanks to this, he is now in an elite restaurant. He's being treated so well that he doesn't even know what to make of it. It definitely motivates him to keep supplying information. Yujia asked, has he finally arrived? When he saw her, he realized he'd looked up her profile beforehand and nearly fainted. Her looks, her family, her abilities. He never imagined someone from the third generation of chaebols would work at headquarters. She thanked him for coming, and Jin Woo asked again, is she alone? She replied, yes, she'll be talking to him today, not the headquarters. After some time, they continued dinner, and she informed them that, unfortunately, it was difficult to provide further support. Chairman Chon-suk was in favor of the idea, but many were against it. Jin Woo replied that if headquarters was against it, there was nothing he could do about it. He understood that he himself could become number one. He would simply stop providing them with information. Instead, she had a proposal for him. Jin Woo was surprised and asked again, what is it? She replied that she was going to find a management company exclusively for him. He was surprised. A management company for one person? This was a very good offer. Unlike headquarters, which was forced to act cautiously, the corporation was driven solely by profit, and he was the one who could definitely transfer that profit. Moreover, most of all, he needed to establish a connection with someone with sufficient resources to squeeze every last drop and buy him information at the highest price. She, Yujia, along with Daesung's professional support, was ready to give him full support in everything. He looked at her with admiration and thought, is there a better place than Daesung? After all, money doesn't lie. He happily told her that they had met several times today, but she would turn out to be a truly good person. Yujia replied that for someone as talented as him, it was only natural. Then she'd explain the details along with the contract, and if it was convenient for him, she'd send it to him tomorrow. He should also check the pets he ordered. Jin Woo asked again, already? He hadn't even signed the contract yet. Yujia replied, well, yes, they prepared them regardless of his signing, and he could consider it a gift. Jin Woo was overjoyed by these words. After a while, Jin-ah approached him and asked her brother, he's still here today, right? What was he even doing that he didn't even call? He even seems to have his own place. When she looked up, she saw Yuji-ah in ordinary casual clothes and thought she was incredibly beautiful, until she realized she seemed to have seen that face somewhere online. When she remembered that it was that same Yuji-ah, she exclaimed in surprise. Meanwhile, Jin-woo was training in the arena with his pets and the instructor was shouting at them, more. They'll only get stronger if they give it their all. Jin Woo replied that he'd do one more attempt. Ramba collapsed, exhausted, muttering that she had no strength left. The instructor whispered, silence, someone was coming. Conversation was forbidden, and Pokryon, along with Ramba, also fell silent. When Yujia approached them, Jin Woo was glad she'd come, and she replied, yes, he's been training since early morning. He replied, yes, it's just a light warm-up. His pets were here too. What a great team he has. Some of them she was seeing for the first time. Jin Woo laughed and replied that this was his main squad. Let them go and finish training, because he would formally introduce them later. Yujia replied that she would give him a gift first. The system indicated that Yujia was offering him a trade. He should carefully review the player's offer. SB supports player-to-player trading like other games. He trades A-rank Sky Silkworm pets for another A-rank pet. The trade was accepted, and if he cheated and escaped, he could literally die from the curse of the system window. She actually managed to find them all, and he clenched his hand into a fist. Afterwards, he bowed and thanked her, saying it was truly a precious gift. Yujia chuckled and said it was nothing, then pulled a contract out of her bag and asked, are they getting started? The name of the management company was U-Bake, a composite of their last name. He would get 70% of the shares, she 25%, and the chairman, Chan-suk, would get 5%. The chairman would remain at headquarters to continue supporting them from within. She also planned to hire Byung-jin and Setop as employees. Jin-woo assumed so, but they were from headquarters. She replied that they had quit that morning. She told them she would triple their current salaries. The protagonist grinned and replied that he was grateful. Of course, but 70%? Was she sure that was okay with her? Yujia replied that it was her way of making a bet. She'd take a solid 25%, and in exchange she'd have the opportunity to increase the value of that 25%. Besides, voting rights weren't that important in a company for just one person. The key was his relationship with Jin Woo. Now was the time to put greed aside and strengthen their bond. He put his stamp on the contract, and it was sealed. They shook hands joyfully, and the instructor silently looked at the glow nearby. Yuji asked what it was. Suddenly, there was an explosion, and the instructor took advantage of his prey and grabbed her. Jinwoo was surprised to see her and asked what he was doing there. She was frightened and face down, unable to speak. Jinwoo guessed, so she recognized Yuji and decided to follow her. Jin-ah said she was just curious. That's why she came. Why follow right away? He replied that this is what's called stalking, which made Jin-ah feel ashamed. Jinwoo asked if she saw him when she came here and decided to secretly watch. Jin-ah didn't answer, then suddenly started screaming. Yes, that's right. She rushed to her brother and shouted that he could never be acquainted with her. What had he done, and how did he even end up near her? In her mind, everything was too confusing. The contract had a clause about family, so they would have met sooner or later anyway, and Yuji said that she was just about to meet his family, so everything worked out quite well. Jin-ah was dumbfounded when she heard Yuji say that she wanted to meet her. She started screaming, "Let him speak up already." Suddenly, she fell silent and looked at her, and Jinwoo spoke briefly, telling her a short story. A moment later, Jin-ah asked, he used to be quite a famous gamer and recently broke the record in a low-level dungeon, right? So he decided to return to headquarters and meet Yuji. He replied that he did, and Jin-ah smirked, looked at him, and asked, but didn't he play some mobile game for a long time before that? Jinwoo asked again and abruptly said it was a different game. He'd been playing SB for about a year. He remembered that she still doesn't know that he is the god Jinwoo. This made Jin-ah scream. Even a year is a long time if he doesn't know, for such a worthy game. So his nerding had finally paid off, right? Jinwoo thought it wasn't that he didn't trust her. There's just a slim chance that the family who's cared for him for 3 years will end up in danger. He can't just mindlessly drag them into all this. He needed to be strong enough to protect them first, and only then could he reveal his identity. She asked, why was he only telling her now? Jinwoo replied that he'd been meaning to tell her everything. He'd explain everything to his parents, so for now, she could keep it a secret. But she had her reasons. She replied, okay. And suddenly their eyes locked as the instructor spotted an elf in the bushes. Jinwoo said that if she was going to level up that dark elf, she should summon a wolf from him using them together. Without that, she wouldn't even get 10% of the efficiency. Jin-ah asked, Shadow Wolf? Is there such a pet? Jinwoo replied that she most likely didn't know about it, and how could she even get to rank B? Suddenly, she saw notifications that they had everything except what she needed, and was dumbfounded. Then she turned to her brother and asked, is he offering to buy it? A shadow wolf costs 500 million. That would take 20 years. He told her to just wait, because he'd get it in a month. She burst into joy and screamed, can he get such an expensive pet? Has he become a player and is now going out of his way to seem cool? He should forget about it, because she'll save up and buy it herself. Jinwoo told her not to cry with happiness when she got it. After that, he waved his pet and said that the training was over, and she looked at him thoughtfully. Something was wrong. He seemed different. A week later, Jinwoo was at the gate. He asked Bingjin what this was. Yuji replied that it was the equipment he would wear in the dungeons. Mr. Jinwoo, the company's main business is information. He asked again, information? They sell videos of the walkthroughs for a lot of money, and this advanced equipment is required for that. It records everything around in 3D. This suit is extremely flexible and lightweight, so it won't be uncomfortable. Jinwoo thought for a moment and was suddenly informed that the camera was already set up. This is even more stressful than filming. He said that he would be doing Monday's dungeon for the first time and wasn't sure he could easily complete it. Is that okay? Yuji replied yes, they'll just edit the best moments anyway. He replied, okay. Is it okay if he breaks the national record right after entering? Yuji looked at him in surprise, thinking that he'd just said he wasn't sure he could beat it quickly. Was this a joke? Maybe the 1.3 billion contract was putting too much pressure on him? She told him not to worry, everything would be fine, and he should play calmly like he used to. Jinwoo replied, okay, and entered the portal. The national record for Monday's dungeon is about 7 minutes, meaning he could break it quite easily. When he descended into Monday's dungeon, it was the only dungeon with special rules. Here, completion time directly affects ratings, as in most games. Attack power runes are extremely important in SB. Without them, it would be extremely difficult. They're called universal runes for a reason. This is a defensive dungeon, and you typically have to fend off waves of undead for 30 minutes. But the time still matters, even though it's called defensive. If you defeat the final boss, it'll all be over instantly, so the standard tactic is to go straight to the boss. He assumed the equipment seemed to be working properly, and the system suggested which squad he wanted to summon. The player could create up to 3 squads. He'd already set them up for daily dungeons. All his pets had gathered around him, and a golden fairy had also been summoned. He must hold off the evil Lich's legion of undead until they arrived at his feet. The remaining time was 30 minutes. As the clock ticked, terrifying skeletons rushed at him. A huge creature, one of the protagonist's pets, began to scatter them in all directions with just his bare hands. After it destroyed them, the golden fairy suggested they go straight to the boss. After some time, when they found the main creature, they approached, and Jinwoo said that first, they should climb the hill. As soon as he realized they were recording, he immediately bit his tongue. They got here in 2 minutes, even with the small mobs that followed them. A moment later, one of the skeleton skulls was destroyed by a gorilla, and it was thrown aside by the other skeletons. Jinwoo was surprised that Minikong and Hungyu were doing so well. He was so glad they were on his side, not against him. He looked at the boss himself and told the battle sheriff to get ready. The battle sheriff had a long range and excellent accuracy, but the damage was so pathetic that no one was using it. He asked if he'd really turned on auto battle for 32 hours and not even noticed. But low-level Monday dungeons are a real salvation, because the Lich doesn't have much health. He abruptly told him to stop and not shoot. The priestess should use Radiance and Blessing. Blessing had an effect. It removed the Dark Shield, a skill that grants immunity to ranged attacks. Now, everything is fine, he told him to shoot. When the sheriff did this, the battle continued, and the instructor also fought for victory. He destroyed skeleton after skeleton with his sword, cleaving them in half. Minikong happily continued the fight and wasn't even wounded. The Golden Fairy assisted them throughout. After the sheriff had expended several bullets, Jinwoo realized his damage output was truly pathetic compared to the others, though his health was clearly slowly depleting. He tried to hit the skeletons with bullets, but they barely felt a thing. Usually, due to weak runes and low levels, this would take a long time, which is why everyone considers it useless and rarely uses it. However, at that moment, Minikong's health increased. The skeleton flew into the sky, and everyone noticed. Minikong also looked at the attacking skeleton, and Jinwoo smiled, realizing that this only affected regular players. At that moment, he didn't move, and the monster was destroyed by Instructor Hungyo's sword, which protected him. He could unlock its potential. If he chose the right runes and skills, even top-tier leches could vanish with a single bullet. A moment later, the boss began to fall to the ground and collapsed with a crash. The system announced that it had been defeated, and the dungeon had been completed, with a completion time of 4 minutes. All the guys rejoiced at this victory, as they had broken the South Korean record and earned a special achievement. Yu-Jia couldn't believe he'd actually beat Monday's dungeon record. It was somehow strange. It had only been a week since she'd given him these pets, and even if he hadn't broken the record, she would still have supported him. Byung-jin replied that he knew, but Jinwoo was seriously planning to break his own records in daily dungeons. Yu-Jia asked, "What?" He replied that he was saying that it was certainly cool that he'd broken the Tuesday dungeon record, but he still hadn't explained how he planned to beat the others. There were plenty of experienced players in Korea over the course of a year, but what if he was just bluffing? Yu-Jia asked, "Is that what he's worried about?" Bung-jin lowered his gaze, and Yu-Jia said she'd started this business with her own money, and even if what she feared happened, she'd make sure it didn't affect their careers. Their salaries wouldn't change either. The guys looked at her like she was a goddess, hugging each other and saying it was truly a dream job, and he'd dedicate his entire life to this place. It was all because she could afford it, and besides, Jinwoo was clearly hiding something. She recalled his expression when he'd just entered this portal. He acted like dungeons were a piece of cake for him. A moment later, the record was broken, and they exclaimed, "What record?" Monday's dungeons, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. That's 3 minutes faster than the previous record. Who was he? Everyone knew who Jinwoo was, and it was crazy. Everyone was amazed at what was happening, and that the record had been broken on the first try. Yu-Jia's hands began to shake, and she realized that this business would definitely be successful. She clenched her fist with pride and realized that if everything went as planned, she would hit the jackpot even bigger. MC looked around and thought he needed to do something before leaving. He pressed the button on his jacket and thought, well, he'll start. Time to farm. The system window asked, does he want to start auto battle with this team? SB has the option to enable auto battle after the first daily dungeon run. In other words, his pets farm everything themselves, and he gets a ton of loot. MC pressed the button on the system window, and it informed him that he had summoned a wind fairy. Jinwoo folded his arms and said, Rumba, she's in charge of farming Monday's dungeon. Rumba asked again. Instead of the instructor, MC smiled and replied, the instructor should train the others. What? She wants to train too? Memories flashed before Ramba's eyes. She tearfully asked him to let her farm. Please, let him just let her farm. Jinwoo replied, of course. He thought, okay, he'll clear the rest of the daily dungeons at the same time, and then he'll turn on auto battle to collect the rewards and train the rest of the pets. A perfectly efficient scheme. Not a second will be wasted. MC smiled and, entering the teleporter, said, he's counting on her. Ramba! She waved after him and said, yes, let him leave it to her. Jinwoo entered the portal, and people appeared in front of him. Assistant Jia began to bow and say welcome. Bungjin said he knew he could be counted on. MC handed him his jacket and said, yes, all the videos are saved here. They don't need anything else, right? Jia replied, of course not. Byung-jin cried out happily, thank him very much. Jia said she would make sure this video doesn't leak anywhere, so he doesn't have to worry about the news. MC said he didn't mind if news of the record spread this time. Jia asked in surprise, what? MC replied, he needs her to take care of his family's safety. He thought, gangs are still active in Korea, and he's incredibly valuable to Ubake, so they're obligated to provide much stricter security. Jia nodded and said, I understand. She'll protect them, even if it means using Daesung's powers. After a while, the system window reported, the dungeon is cleared. The completion time was 3 minutes. MC looked at this and thought he'd only done this using Komodo because he was recording it. And yet, his result could easily take a place in the world rankings. If he gives the spotted Komodo runes for movement speed and unlocks the full potential of the Wind Falcon to enhance its speed, then breaking the record will be a piece of cake. This concludes the recording of Tuesday's dungeon. Wednesday's dungeon. Wednesday's dungeon, where protection runes are obtained, has one special feature. Namely, it's incredibly cold here and that's why his movement speed is greatly reduced. MC opened the system window and said, he's about to freeze to death. The system window reported that he summoned Ice Cat and Wind Falcon. He summoned Titan Golem and Horned Fairy. He summoned Explosive Dragon Mage. Jinwoo thought you can't do without pets with cold resistance here, and the best one among them is Ice Cat. He looked around and said, yes. He saw the running monsters and with a smirk on his face said, Titan Golem. He thought, it will strengthen the golem's shield. MC waved his hand and said, Wind Falcon. He thought, and with the speed boost from the Wind Falcon, he could quickly get through everything. Everyone climbed onto the golem's palm, which lifted them onto its shoulder. MC smiled, and a moment later grabbed his mouth and thought, this is certainly cool, but he's starting to feel sick. The monsters ran towards them, and Jinwoo thought, the titanium golem is truly impressive. It's the perfect tank. But that's not all. Only the titanium golem can go through this route, and it saves a lot of time. Jinwoo told Pokryon to get ready. She looked up, and at that moment, the golem jumped into the air. The system window reported, boss, attention, attention, the boss is appearing. A huge creature appeared in front of the golem and screamed, and Jinwoo cried out in fear. A horned fairy, she appeared in front of him, and MC cried out, Pokryon now. She released her fire mana forward and created a giant serpent. The system window reported, he defeated the boss. The dungeon is cleared. The clearing time is 4 minutes. MC clenched his fist and cried out, yes, he said joyfully, another new record. Suddenly he froze and said he got motion sickness. No, it's golem sickness. And then a news headline appeared on the phone screen, a new South Korean record. Wednesday's dungeon was cleared in just 4 minutes and 22 seconds. Who is this Baek Jin-woo? From that moment on, a guy was walking down the road and reading. Baek Jin-woo? A girl asked. This guy? Wasn't he the one who set the record in Tuesday's dungeon? All of South Korea was talking about Baek Jin-woo. Newspaper headlines appeared with captions. Who is Baek Jin-woo? The girl asked. Baek Jin-woo. Who the hell is that? The guy asked again. She doesn't remember. He's the guy they wrote about on the forum when he broke Kang Kyung-ho's record. The girl answered. Exactly. Another guy asked. Did he break the record again? The guy answered. Yes. And is this Kang Kyung-ho's record again? He doesn't really look like a player. The headlines kept coming. It's incredible, something like this has never happened before. All eyes in the world are on the player Baek Jin-woo. The man sat in a chair and spoke thoughtfully. Baek Jin-woo. The guy asked, wasn't this the one Chairman Park Chan-suk was talking about? The one who promised information in exchange for the summoning scrolls. The man looked at him and asked, the one Chairman Im Hee-soo objected to. The guy replied, yes, that's right. Then he said that he wouldn't give money until he got the information first. The man leaned back in his chair and said, but it looks like that information was true. It looks like it. He exhaled and thought, then what Chairman Im Hee-soo said seemed right. But in politics, only the result matters. If they had supported Baek Jin-woo back then, now they would have received not only public recognition, but also many more votes. It looks like Im Hee-soo has really lost his grip to reject the luck that was coming into his hands. He said, okay, secretary. The guy replied, yes, sir. The old man told him to try to contact that player, Baek Jin-woo again. The guy asked again, what, directly from him? The old man replied, yes, they thought he was just a dud. But that's clearly not the case. They need to get him at all costs. Monday and Wednesday dungeons drop runes. Tuesday's dungeon, reforging potions. And Thursday's dungeon, skill books. Although these books don't have unique pet skills or hidden skills that can only be obtained with the help of a trainer, they do drop other useful skills, so they're worth clearing. Plus, this means you don't have to clear Sunday's dungeon. Both Sunday and Thursday's dungeons drop skill books, but Thursday's dungeon is much easier. Thanks to this, you don't have to grind endlessly, so they decided to rest on Sundays. So why is Thursday's dungeon considered easy? Because a boss appears right when you enter. They call it a boss rush. This boss has incredibly high defense, so you need to use a rank B White Wolf with a defense-reducing skill. Although, MC opened the system window and summoned pets. You can just kill the monster, of course, if the DPS allows it. Jinwoo thought about it. You can't even put a video like that up for sale. He'll literally steamroll the monsters with his pumped-up pets. He'll just stick to the standard tactic, cut down its defense with the White Wolf, and then finish it off with burst damage. It's a good old standard tactic. It's not like he doesn't have tips on how to beat the record. MC reached into the golem's palm and said, Titan. He figured he just needed to hit the golem's weak spot, its head. That's why he uses the titanium golem. Jinwoo waved his hand and said, Dragon Mage, instructor, have them aim for the head. The golems began fighting each other, and Hunyo swung his sword and attacked the creature. Pokryon swung her staff and created a stream of fire, creating a fiery creature. She killed the golem and landed on her ally's shoulder. The system window reported he'd defeated the boss. Dungeon cleared. Completion time, 5 minutes and 10 seconds. MC clenched his fist joyfully and said he'd beaten the Korean record by a whole minute. He looked down at Hungyo and thought, the instructor is definitely overkill, but he still isn't going to use it to farm the final dungeon. After all, one well-leveled dragon mage is enough there. With her help, even top-tier dungeons can be cleared in seconds. He happily patted Pakrion on the head and thought, taking into account the entrance and exit, he thinks the clearing took about 10 seconds. Hungyo looked up, and Jinwoo said, okay, they'll clear it again. He exited the portal when suddenly a guy approached him and asked for forgiveness. Was he, by any chance, a player named Baek Jinwoo? MC replied, yes, it was him. The guy smiled and handed him a business card. They said they came from headquarters on the director's orders. Jinwoo took it and said, okay. Did something happen? He thought for a moment, thinking the matter with headquarters was closed. The guy said they considered his previous proposal, and since he showed such results, they are ready to consider it. Jinwoo interrupted him and said, that proposal. Let them forget it. The guys stared at him in surprise, and the MC thought, results? Considered? He imagined two choices. Trust the angel Jia or trust the headquarters. Jinwoo got angry and thought, this is all just a pretty wrapper. They are the complete opposite of Yu Jia. He said, actually, he is already collaborating with one company. If they want to say something, let them go through Yu Jia from Yu Baek. He walked past the guys and said, well, goodbye. The guy turned around and asked, Yu Baek? Senior, who is Yu Baek? And Yu Jia, is that the one from Daesun? The guy replied, they will figure it out as soon as they get back. He has a feeling like they missed something very important. Jinwoo imagined headquarters texting him with declarations of love, and he was logging out of the chat. He stopped, looked around and said, I think that's enough. The Sweating Sickness dungeon was different from the others. While in other dungeons, you could simply summon pets and order them to kill monsters, here you had to run through the dungeon yourself to complete it. He opened the system window and thought, it's time for him to start training too. The system window informed him that he had summoned a sky wyvern. Jinwoo thought the shield would prevent him from dying from the fall, but he was still scared. He turned to Sky and asked, is she ready? He climbed onto her back and ordered her to fly to the eastern sea. He closed his eyes, then opened them and looked around in surprise. He thought, this is much more fun. Jinwoo cried out, okay, let's go. Hungyo said, his master, his speed in learning to fly is simply astounding. As expected, he's amazing. MC said, no, not that much. Hungyo interrupted him and shouted, no, he's serious. Pokrion said, but it's true. Even they had a hard time flying wyverns at first. MC thought, come to think of it, Hungyo and Pokrion had ridden wyverns and dolphins back in SB. Pokrion said, as expected of the god Jinwoo, their lord. He said, slightly embarrassed, yes, thank you. Hungyo at that moment felt discriminated against because Jinwoo didn't thank him. MC said, anyway, next they have to train on sky dolphins, right? Pokrion replied, yes. Jinwoo said, they have plenty of experience in this, so he's counting on them. Pokrion happily said, they'll do their best. Hungyo said, yes, his lord. A few days later, MC entered Friday's dungeon. This dungeon drops special runes, and it was here that he earned the title of God of Clearing. MC said, Wind Falcon. The system window reported, the player's run will start in 10 seconds. Let him reach the destination as quickly as possible. He ordered to give him a speed buff. The falcon beeped, and the countdown came to an end. Jinwoo got ready and quickly ran forward. He ran forward, dodging obstacles. Doing all this himself, he realized that this was much more interesting than just controlling the character on the screen. Well, it's time for him to take the first hidden route. Usually, you have to cross the water and run further, but he pushed off from the platform and shouted, Sky Dolphin! The system window reported, he summoned a sky dolphin. The creature rushed towards him and they dove underwater. Jinwoo thought, using the dolphin to swim underwater, he can avoid all the obstacles above. They jumped out of the water and MC shouted, Sky Wyvern! He thought, now it's time for him to fly. All that's left is to fly over the last obstacle. He quickly flew to the finish line and shouted, they did it. The system window reported, he reached the finish line. The system window congratulates him. He broke the Korean record. A special achievement has been earned. After clearing Friday's dungeon, Jinwoo went to Saturday's dungeon. The system window reported, all the monsters were destroyed. The dungeon is cleared. The clearing time is 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Afterwards, Sunday's dungeon was also cleared in an instant. The system window reported, he defeated the absolute master. The dungeon is cleared. Ramba said it was hard. Hungyo replied, but their training paid off. MC helped Pokrion up and she said, great job. The system window congratulated him on this. He broke the South Korean national record. Jinwoo wiped the sweat from his brow and said, he finally caught up with the top players. He thought if he continued to farm dungeons, their clearing time would become even shorter. The clearing time was 14 minutes and 50 seconds. MC thought he would farm once a day until he could start clearing medium dungeons. He would need to clear a high-level dungeon at least once, get the ruins and skills, and only then would he be able to even look at the Tower of Trials. MC looked away and thought he wondered if 2 pets would be enough for him. By the way, if we don't count the high-level summon scrolls, what should he do with all these rewards? Sometime later in Yu Baek's office, Jia was sitting at her desk and looking at the news headlines on her phone. She thought, the whole world is going crazy about Baek Jinwoo. Well, that's not surprising. He broke all records in just a week. Jia turned to Mr. Kim Byung-jin. He peeked out from behind his computer and asked, "Yes, madam?" Jia asked, "How's the editing going?" Byungjin exhaled and clutched his head, saying, "He just finished this," but the assistant peeked out and asked, "Is something wrong?" Byungjin replied, "Not really. He just couldn't believe his eyes while editing the video." "Do they want to take a look?" At Baek Jin-woo's request, he didn't include the Thursday and Sunday dungeons in the video. They started watching the video, and Jia began to carefully study every frame. She asked, "What the hell? This is nonsense." Byungjin said, "His strategy and the way he executes it is on a completely different level, like some kind of circus performance." Jia asked, "Is this even possible?" The assistant said, "You can't even see something like this in a movie." Byungjin said, "He thinks even if they sell it, there will only be a small number of players who can do it." Jia thought, "This just proves how incredible Baek Jin-woo is." She said, "First, you need to buy all the pets mentioned in the video before selling it." Byungjin said, "That's how it is. She wants to occupy the market early." Jia answered, "Exactly. They need to make the most of the information they received." Byungjin picked up the tablet and answered, he understood. He will buy as many as the budget allows. Jia said, "No, there's no need to pay attention to the budget and buy everyone. She will solve everything if finances become insufficient." Byungjin began to imagine different options, and Jia sat down at the table and began quickly typing something. She imagined the director shouting, "Dae-sung, you Jia?" He ordered the department head to be brought to him. The currencies knelt before her and said they guarantee that they will have the maximum limit possible. Yes, they are even ready to give her their watches. They asked to let them know if they need anything else. Jia smiled and thought, she sorted out the finances and bought all the pets. Now, it's time to sell the videos. She wrote, "Sold exclusively to players officially registered with the national headquarters of South Korea. The price of a video guide with Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday is 100 million won. A text guide with Thursday and Sunday is 10 million won. Sale of guides for completing all daily dungeons. A professional guide by Baek Jin-woo, a record holder from South Korea. A confidentiality agreement is required. This is transferred from player to player through the exchange system." Byungjin glanced at her computer screen and said, "Ma'am, if she allows it, do you really need to sell this at such a low price?" Jia smirked and replied, "These guides are just bait to sell pets. Besides, it contributes to the development of South Korean players." The assistant turned around and said, "Chairman, what price should we set for pets?" Jia told him to sell C-rank ones for 200 million and B-rank ones for 1 billion. The guy turned around in surprise and said, "That's 10 times the market price. Isn't that too expensive? When the word spreads, the price of these particular pets will skyrocket. And since they have most of these pets, they will have to buy them at an inflated price." Jia thought, now it's time to get a reward for investing in Baek Jin-woo. She posted, and after a while, Byungjin asked, "The chairman, he's not sleeping, right?" Jia laughed, and a sales income report of 377 billion won appeared on the screen. Byungjin asked, "They haven't even started yet. What kind of nonsense is this?" The guys were thrown back by the shine of the money, and Jia thought, the pets she bought for Baek Jin-woo cost 1.5 billion won. To think that everything turned out exactly like this. She takes a deep breath to calm herself. She said, "Their business has finally taken off. They will start with small investments right now. First of all, they will buy a building." The guys bowed to her, and after a while, MC sat on a bench and looked at the amount in his account. He happily said that he had earned 54 million won in just a week by selling high-level summoning scrolls. Ramba happily said, "Just look at how many cream buns you can buy." Jin-woo clutched his phone to his chest and said, "The rewards from the dungeons are just amazing." Ramba asked, "Haven't EX rank pets dropped anymore?" MC asked again. Has Ramba forgotten? She looked at him questioningly, and Jin-woo remembered all the scary moments. He said that for 10,000 summon scrolls, nothing dropped. Ramba sighed, and he thought, besides, it's better to train the pets he has now than to try to get something worthwhile. And he also needs to sell all the junk he managed to farm. Maybe he should ask Yu-Jia for help? He looked at his phone screen and thought, right, Baek Jin-ah sells runes. Since items for sale will continue to drop, why not entrust it to Jin-ah? He quickly started typing a message and thought, this way he can share the profits with her. Besides, he heard that Jin-ah had paid part of his expenses while he was in the hospital. Jin-woo texted Jin-ah, asking her to meet up and telling her to come to the designated place whenever she could. He thought it was time for him to repay her. At that moment, the girls were talking to each other in the cafe. One of them laughed and said she heard her new boyfriend was a player. Is that true? The girl replied, yes. Has she seen his pets yet? What are they like? Maybe he has a B-rank pet? The girl replied she doesn't know, but he said he'll get one soon. The girl said in surprise, he'll probably give her a pet or a rune later. She's so jealous. Jin-ah exhaled and the girl asked, what happened? She didn't look well. Jin-ah looked at her with fear and replied, no, she just thought for a second. The girl said that if something was bothering her, she should just tell them. Yes, she would feel better if she talked it out. Jin-ah closed her eyes and said, girls. She thought she was very touched, but her brother, the very player everyone is talking about now. How should she tell them that he has already opened a company selling information? Well, yes, he probably has his reasons for hiding everything. And still, the girl asked, Jin-ah, what is her brother doing now? The guy said, yes, they haven't heard from him for a long time. Jin-ah said puzzled, she doesn't know anything. She grabbed her hair and thought how hard it was. She can't even tell her mom and dad about this. In her imagination, she was tearing her hair out, and in the present, a message came on her phone. She read the messages from MC and thought in surprise, does he want to tell her something else? She got up from the table and said, girls, let them forgive her, but I think she has to go. They looked after her questioningly and asked, so suddenly? They were going to have dinner together today. Jinna asked to be forgiven, but her brother called her. The girl asked, her brother? The one who just came out of the coma? Is he okay? Jinna smiled and answered, yes, she will tell everything later. Next time she will treat them. Let them forgive. She left and thought, her ears were burning. After a while, Jinna stopped in surprise and asked, what is going on here? She saw MC's pets training and looking at Hungyo thought, is this the guy who defeated her shadow elf last time? He turned around and looked at her in surprise. Jinwoo asked, has she arrived already? She turned around happily and screamed, brother, what's going on here? She looked at MC's body and froze. She asked again, is this it? She thought, has he always had a body like this? He just came from the hospital, where he was on an IV. Jinwoo asked, is she okay? Jinna screamed, bro, what are these pets? MC asked again, what's wrong with them? Jinna said, their market price has skyrocketed recently. The system window reported that the battle sheriff costs 200 million. The Priestess of Radiance 200 million, and the Celestial Wyvern, Wind Falcon, and Titan Golem are each 1 billion. Jinna said they're really hard to get, and there aren't many left. She froze and thought, wait, where did he even get such rare pets? They say they were in that video Yubek sold. Yubek? She widened her eyes and said, no way. Bro, was it he who broke the daily dungeon records with these pets? MC folded his arms and said, yes. Jinna asked where he got them all, and why was he so calm? He asked, she remembers you Jia, right? Jinna screamed, Jia? Of course she remembers. MC replied she gave them to him. Jinna froze and then screamed loudly, gave them? They are terribly expensive. Don't they belong to the company? Jinwoo replied, yes. She said it was a gift. Anyway, she quickly came. Jinna asked, really? Why did he call her? Jinwoo asked, is she still selling runes? Jinna replied, yes, she just sold some yesterday. He opened the system window and asked, just to see if she could see. He dumped a huge pile of runes in front of Jinna and she screamed, what? What is all this? MC replied, these are rewards for completing dungeons. Does she want to take a look? Jinna took 1 stone and asked, this is a speed rune, right? But the stats are not that great. This cleavage rune has a crit chance. This can be sold for a really high price. MC looked at her and thought, bake Jinna. She sells runes every day and that's why she knows so much. She has a pretty good eye. She remembers even the effects of runes with a low drop rate. And she instantly determines the value of skill books and materials. Besides, she immediately recognized his pets. She probably never leaves the market. Jinwoo turned to Jinna and said that he would give it all to her. Will she try to sell it? Jinna looked at him in surprise and asked, did he want her to do this? She thought about it. She was sure she could sell it for a good price. At least, no worse than others. MC thought she had demonstrated her business acumen more than once, even as a child, in all the games. For her, trading has always been more interesting than hunting. Jinna thought, but if she sells all this, she will not need to farm runes anymore. Although, maybe it is better for her to just focus on sales? After all, she only started farming because she needed things to sell. The only thing that worries her. She asked, then what percentage will she get from the sales? Jinna thought she also needs to think about the future. She can do everything for free a couple of times, but not all the time. MC asked how much she wants. Jinna said, well, large wholesalers usually take 8 to 10%. But since it's him, she'll only take 5%. How does he like that? Jinwoo asked again. What does 5% mean? Between them, he offered her 20%. Jinna looked at him in surprise, and MC said, he'll give her a whole 20%, so she should try to sell it for as much as possible. Jinna froze in shock and said, 20%. He's giving her that much? MC waved his hand at her and said, he'll bring her more runes later, so she should get ready to work. Jinna screamed. Later? So he wants her to do this all the time? She thought. Selling all these items with a 20% commission, now she won't have to farm runes anymore. She wiped away her tears and thought with a smile, she'll become a professional merchant. Having entrusted Jin-Ah with selling all the rewards from the dungeon, he seriously set about leveling Pokryon. After a while, a scream rang out. Pokryon struck. A large stream of fire rushed forward, and MC erected a barrier. He thought, after all, a powerful damage dealer is essential for any strong player. Jinwoo smiled and said, good job, Pokryon. He patted her head and said, at this rate, she'll soon be able to clear D-rank dungeons with her eyes closed. That's impressive. Pokryon smiled and thanked him. Jinwoo looked away and thought it had been a while since they'd gone into a dungeon together. He was sure the others were also training diligently under Hungyo. Summon pets can exist without a player for several hours and even disperse on their own after that time. Meanwhile, the pets were doing strange things. After some time in the dungeon, MC said, by the way, Pokryon. She said, yes, Master Jinwoo. He asked, does she want anything? At that moment, a monster started attacking them and screamed loudly, but Pokryon turned around and released fire mana in its direction. She turned around and asked, what does she want? MC replied, yes, like Hungyo or Ramba, for example. Let her just say what's on her mind. Pokryon looked down and said, yes, she just needs to be useful to him, Master Jinwoo. He patted her head again and said, come on, let her choose anything. Maybe she wants something to eat? He thought, summoned pets don't really need to eat, but he often shares food with those who look like humans. Since Ramba likes cream buns, it means they have good taste, so he can't eat treats alone in their presence. Jinwoo paused, wondering if she liked anything at all. Pokrion paused, and MC thought, she's so shy. Maybe she likes desserts? Pokrion said. Actually she does. MC looked at her happily and asked what it was. She replied, fried chicken and beer. Jinwoo asked, puzzled. Fried chicken and beer? He replied, okay. In that case, Pokrion, what skill will she unlock next? Hungyo has already discovered this skill. The secret stage of the dragon art. Pokrion said, dragon art, connection, transformation, flame, destruction. MC asked, then what about a special day off when she masters this skill? Pokrion asked in surprise. Really? Jinwoo answered, yes. On that day, they will throw a party for everyone with fried chicken and beer. Did they agree? Pokrion happily said, she agrees. She will work hard for this day off. MC thought, is she more happier with the break than with the chicken? Well, never mind. The main thing is that she has motivation. After a while, Jia stood on the hill and watched the machinery work. Byungjin asked, madam, how did she find such a place? Jia folded her arms across her chest and replied, she bought it from her grandfather. The U-Black headquarters will be built here. She pointed to the side and said, there will be an office here, and over there a dormitory and apartments for the staff, and she will build a bunker under each building. Byungjin asked again, a bunker? Jia answered, yes. She remembered MC's words that she just needed to focus on protecting the family. She thought about it, because a promise must be kept, and since he likes open spaces, this place would be perfect for training. Jia asked, Mr. Byungjin, did he find the pet she asked for? He looked at her and answered, yes, the shadow wolf she asked to find. But why exactly him? Jia looked at the creature and said, she wants to give the creature to someone. After a while, meat was being cooked in the restaurant, and a girl said, Jinna, it's so delicious. Another girl looked at her and asked, can they really afford such a treat? Jinna answered, of course. Let them order whatever they want. The girls happily said, yes, successful players. This is a completely different level. Jinna thought, it's all thanks to her brother. The items he gives her are not only numerous, but their stats are simply incredible. At the item sales point, people were shouting loudly, these items are simply the best. Here's their business card. Let her contact them if any good runes appear. Jinna thought, thanks to him, her customer base has grown very quickly. The girl asked, have they heard of Baek Jinwoo? He's in great demand now. They say he's broken all his records again. Jinna froze from what she heard, and someone said, at this rate, he'll soon break world records. He's simply amazing. Jinna smiled and thought, her brother really is amazing. Someone asked, isn't he handsome? He probably has a girlfriend. They're so jealous of her. Jinna, is she that hungry? Jinna froze and thought, handsome. It's like they're talking about different Baek Jinwoo. What are they even talking about? The girl asked, does he have social media? Another girl asked, since he works for you, Jia, maybe she follows him? Jinna frowned and started eating, and the girl stopped in surprise and said, this account. Jinna, isn't this her account? Why is Yu Jia following her? She cried out in surprise. What? They're getting something mixed up. She looked at her phone screen and thought, is this true? She didn't just follow her as a fan. When did she have time to follow back? She probably followed out of politeness, because she's his sister. They're staring. The girl looked at her and cried out, wait, what? Let her explain. Do they even know each other? Let her just not tell them they're close? Jinna looked questioningly at the phone screen, and the girl asked her to tell them. She asked her to wait a second. She saw a message from Jia asking if she was free tomorrow. Jinna screamed loudly with joy, and the girls asked, Jinna, what happened? The waiter looked at her puzzled. Having